The Inuit are the people of ice and snow. For thousands of years, they have called the Arctic home. They build houses from frozen water. They hunt whales in waters so cold that most humans cannot survive. They read the sky, the wind, and the movement of animals to find their way across endless white landscapes. The Inuit have created one of the most remarkable cultures in human history. Their story is one of survival, wisdom, and deep connection to the natural world. The story starts in Asia, thousands and thousands of years ago, during a time when massive sheets of ice covered much of the northern world. The ancestors of all Native American peoples lived in what is now Siberia. This was during the last ice age, a period when so much of the Earth's water was locked up in glaciers that the sea levels dropped dramatically. When the seas fell, land that had been underwater became exposed. One of the most important pieces of land to emerge was a wide bridge connecting Asia to North America. Scientists call this land Bridge Beringia. Beringia was not a narrow strip of land. It was actually a vast region, perhaps 1,000 miles wide from north to south. It was covered in grasslands and tundra, home to mammoths, giant bison, and other animals that no longer exist today. The people who lived in this region did not know they were crossing from one continent to another. To them, they were simply following the animals they hunted, moving across familiar terrain in search of food and shelter. The crossing from Asia to North America happened over many generations. It was not a single migration, but rather a slow movement of people over thousands of years. Different groups crossed at different times, and they brought with them different languages, different tools, and different ways of living. The ancestors of the Inuit were among the last of these groups to make the journey, and they would prove to be among the most remarkable. The earliest migrations into North America began perhaps 20,000 years ago, though scientists continue to debate the exact timing. These first peoples spread throughout the Americas, eventually reaching the southern tip of South America. They adapted to every environment they encountered, from tropical rainforests to high mountain ranges to vast plains. But the Arctic remained largely empty of human settlement for thousands of years after the first migrations. The reason for this is simple. The Arctic is one of the most challenging environments on Earth for human survival. Temperatures can drop to 50 or 60 degrees below zero. The sun disappears entirely for months during the winter. Food is scarce and difficult to obtain. The landscape offers few materials for building shelter. Most of the early migrants to North America moved south, seeking warmer climates and more abundant resources. But eventually, a group of people developed the skills and technology needed to survive in the far north. These people are known to archaeologists as the Paleo-Eskimo cultures, and they represent the first human inhabitants of the North American Arctic. The earliest of these cultures is called the Denbi Flint Complex, named after a site in Alaska where their distinctive tools were first discovered. These people arrived in Alaska around 5,000 years ago, and they brought with them a toolkit specifically designed for Arctic survival. The Denbi people were masters of working with stone. They created tiny, precisely made blades called microblades, which could be set into handles of bone or antler to create composite tools. These tools were efficient and effective, allowing hunters to take down the animals they needed for survival. The Denbi people spread across the Arctic surprisingly quickly, reaching Greenland within just a few hundred years of their arrival in Alaska. After the Denbi culture came other Paleo-Eskimo traditions. The Arctic small tool tradition spread across the entire Arctic region, from Alaska to Greenland. These people lived in small mobile groups, following the animals they hunted. They used bows and arrows, a technology that gave them an advantage in hunting caribou and other land animals. They built small temporary shelters, moving frequently as they followed the seasonal migrations of their prey. Around 3,000 years ago, a new culture emerged in the eastern Arctic. This culture is known as the Dorset, named after Cape Dorset on Baffin Island, where their artefacts were first identified. The Dorset people represented a significant development in Arctic adaptation. They developed new technologies for hunting sea mammals, including seals and walruses. They created beautiful artwork, carving small figures from ivory and bone that depicted animals, humans, and supernatural beings. The Dorset people were highly successful in their Arctic homeland. For nearly 2,000 years, they thrived across the eastern Arctic and Greenland. They developed a rich spiritual life, evident in the many carved figures they left behind. Some of these carvings show shamans in trance states, transforming into animals or flying through the spirit world. The Dorset people clearly had a complex belief system and a sophisticated understanding of their environment. But the Dorset were not the ancestors of the modern Inuit. Around 1,000 years ago, a new group of people began moving eastward from Alaska. These were the Thule people, and they would eventually replace the Dorset across the entire Arctic. The Thule were the direct ancestors of the Inuit we know today, and their arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in Arctic history. The origins of the Thule culture can be traced to the shores of the Bering Sea in Alaska. Here, around 2,000 years ago, people developed a highly sophisticated maritime hunting culture. They learned to hunt the great whales that migrated through the region, using large skin boats and specialized harpoons. Whale hunting provided enormous quantities of food and raw materials. A single bowhead whale could feed a community for months and provide bone and baleen for tools and construction. The Thule people were innovators. They developed the toggling harpoon, a brilliant piece of technology that made hunting sea mammals much more effective. When a toggling harpoon penetrates an animal, the head detaches and turns sideways beneath the skin, making it impossible for the animal to escape. This technology allowed hunters to successfully take large, powerful animals like walruses and whales. The Thule also developed the kayak and the umiak, two types of boats that became central to Inuit life. The kayak was a small enclosed boat designed for one person. It was fast, maneuverable, and nearly impossible to capsize in the hands of a skilled paddler. The umiak was a larger open boat capable of carrying many people and heavy loads. It was used for whale hunting, for transporting families and belongings, and for travelling long distances along the coast. Around 1,000 years ago, the Thule began expanding eastward from Alaska. The reasons for this expansion are not entirely clear, but several factors likely played a role. The climate was warming during this period, a time known as the medieval warm period. This warming may have allowed whales to travel further east, and the Thule followed them. Population growth in Alaska may have pushed some groups to seek new territories. Whatever the reasons, the Thule migration was remarkably rapid and successful. Within just a few hundred years, the Thule had spread across the entire Arctic, from Alaska to Greenland. Everywhere they went, they encountered the Dorset people who had lived in these regions for centuries. What happened when these two peoples met is still debated by scholars. There is little evidence of warfare or violence. Instead, the Dorset seem to have simply faded away, their population declining as the Thule expanded. Some Dorset may have been absorbed into Thule communities. Others may have retreated to marginal areas where they eventually died out. The last Dorset people disappeared around 500 years ago. Their passing marked the end of the Paleo-Eskimo era and the complete dominance of the Thule and their descendants across the Arctic. The Inuit of today are the direct descendants of these Thule migrants, and many aspects of traditional Inuit culture can be traced directly back to Thule innovations. The genetic heritage of the Inuit reflects this complex history of migration and adaptation. Modern genetic studies have confirmed that the Inuit are descended from a relatively recent migration from Asia, separate from the earlier migrations that gave rise to other Native American peoples. The Inuit share genetic markers with peoples of northeastern Asia. particularly those living around the Bering Sea region. This genetic connection reflects the relatively recent arrival of the Thule ancestors in the Americas. The languages spoken by the Inuit also reflect their common origins. The Inuit languages form a family called Inuit Yupik Unangan, sometimes referred to as Eskimo Aleut. These languages are spoken across the entire Arctic, from Siberia to Greenland. Despite the vast distances involved, the different Inuit dialects are remarkably similar, reflecting the relatively recent spread of the Thule people across the Arctic. The Inuit themselves have their own understanding of their origins. Traditional stories speak of the first people emerging from the earth or being created by powerful spirits. These stories connect the Inuit to their land in ways that scientific accounts cannot capture. They speak of a time before time, when the world was different and humans and animals could speak to each other. These stories are not simply myths, but are living traditions that continue to shape Inuit identity today. The journey from Asia to the Arctic was one of the great human migrations in history. It required incredible courage, adaptability, and skill. The ancestors of the Inuit faced challenges that would have defeated most peoples. They crossed frozen seas, survived brutal winters, and learned to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their success is a testament to human ingenuity and determination. Understanding the origins of the Inuit helps us appreciate the depth of their culture. These are not people who recently arrived in the Arctic. They are the descendants of thousands of years of Arctic adaptation. Every aspect of their traditional culture, from their hunting techniques to their spiritual beliefs, reflects this long history. The Inuit are truly the people of the ice, shaped by their environment over countless generations. The Thule people hold a special place in the story of the Inuit. They were the bridge between the ancient past and the present, the people who created the culture that would become the foundation of Inuit life for 1,000 years. Understanding the Thule is essential to understanding who the Inuit are and how they came to master the Arctic world. The Thule culture emerged on the shores of the Bering Sea around 2,000 years ago. This region, where Alaska nearly touches Siberia, was a place of extraordinary natural abundance. The cold, nutrient-rich waters supported vast populations of fish, seals, walruses, and whales. The land nearby was home to caribou, bears, and smaller game. For people with the skills to harvest these resources, the Bering Sea region offered everything needed for survival and prosperity. The key to Thule success was their mastery of whale hunting. Whales are the largest animals on Earth, and hunting them with hand-thrown harpoons from small boats might seem impossible. But the Thule developed techniques and technologies that made whale hunting not only possible, but remarkably successful. A single bowhead whale could weigh over 50 tons and provide enough food to feed a community through an entire winter. The bones of whales could be used for building houses, making tools, and creating art. Whale oil provided light and heat during the long Arctic nights. The Thule approach to whale hunting was sophisticated and well organized. Hunters would set out in umiaks, large open boats made of animal skins stretched over wooden or bone frames. These boats could hold a crew of 8 or more hunters, each with a specific role to play. The harpooner stood at the bow, ready to strike when the boat came close enough to a whale. Other crew members paddled, managed the lines, and prepared to attach floats that would tire the whale and prevent it from diving deep. The toggling harpoon was the essential tool of the whale hunt. This ingenious device consisted of a sharp point attached to a line. When the harpoon struck a whale, the point would penetrate the blubber and then toggle or turn sideways beneath the skin. This created an anchor that the whale could not shake loose. Attached to the harpoon line were inflated seal bladders that served as floats. As the wounded whale tried to escape, it had to drag these floats with it, exhausting itself in the process. The hunt could last for hours or even days. Hunters would follow the whale, striking it again and again with additional harpoons. Eventually, the great animal would tire and could be approached for the final kill. The entire community would then work together to tow the whale to shore and butcher it. This was a time of celebration and plenty, with fresh meat and blubber shared among all families. Whale hunting required more than just technology. It required detailed knowledge of whale behaviour, ocean currents, and weather patterns. Thule hunters learned to read the subtle signs that indicated where whales might be found. They understood the migration routes that whales followed each year. They knew which conditions were safe for hunting and which were too dangerous. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, accumulated over centuries of experience. The success of whale hunting allowed the Thule to develop a more settled way of life than their Paleo-Eskimo predecessors. While the Dorset and other earlier peoples had lived in small mobile groups, the Thule could afford to build permanent villages. These villages were typically located at prime hunting locations, places where whales or other sea mammals were abundant. Some Thule villages grew quite large, with populations of several hundred people. Thule houses were engineering marvels adapted to the Arctic environment. The most distinctive type was the semi-subterranean house, built partially underground to take advantage of the Earth's insulating properties. The walls were constructed from stone, sod and whale bones. Whale jawbones and ribs provided the framework for the roof, which was covered with skins and sod. A long, low entrance tunnel helped keep cold air out while allowing people to enter and exit. Inside, these houses were surprisingly comfortable. A raised sleeping platform kept people off the cold floor. Oil lamps burning whale or seal blubber provided heat and light. Families would gather on the sleeping platform, sharing warmth and stories during the long winter nights. The temperature inside could be quite warm, even when outside temperatures dropped far below zero. The Thule were also masters of cold weather clothing. They developed the layered clothing system that would become standard among Arctic peoples. The inner layer, worn against the skin, was made from soft caribou fawn skin or bird skins, with the feathers intact. This layer trapped air close to the body, providing insulation. The outer layer was made from tougher caribou skin or seal skin, with the fur facing outward to shed snow and wind. Every piece of Thule clothing was carefully designed for its purpose. Parkas had hoods that could be drawn tight around the face, leaving only a small opening for the eyes and nose. Mittens were attached to the sleeves so they could not be lost. Boots were waterproofed with seal oil and designed with separate inner and outer layers. In this clothing, a person could survive and even work comfortably in temperatures that would quickly kill an unprotected human. The Thule diet was centered on meat and fat. In the Arctic environment, plant foods were scarce and available only during the brief summer months. Meat provided the protein needed for survival, while fat was essential for warmth and energy. The Thule ate the meat of whales, seals, walruses, caribou, fish and birds. They developed techniques for preserving meat through freezing, drying and fermentation. One distinctive Thule food was fermented meat, which remains an important part of Inuit cuisine today. Meat would be placed in pits or bags and allowed to ferment over several weeks or months. The fermentation process partially broke down the meat, making it tender and giving it a strong, distinctive flavour. To outsiders, fermented meat can seem strange or even unpleasant, but to the Inuit, it is a delicacy with deep cultural significance. The Thule were skilled artists and craftspeople. They decorated their tools, weapons, and clothing with carved designs. They created small sculptures from ivory, bone, and antler, depicting animals, humans, and supernatural beings. These artworks were not merely decorative, but often had spiritual significance. A carved image of a seal might help ensure success in hunting. A figure of a protective spirit might ward off danger. Music and storytelling were central to Thule life. During the long winter nights, people would gather to sing, dance, and share stories. Songs might celebrate successful hunts, honour the spirits, or simply provide entertainment. Stories passed down the history and values of the community, teaching young people about the world and their place in it. Drums made from stretched skin provided rhythm for songs and dances. The Thule had a rich spiritual life, centered on the belief that all things possess spirits. Animals, plants, rocks, and natural phenomena all had spiritual essences that demanded respect. Hunters performed rituals before and after hunting to honor the spirits of the animals they killed. These rituals ensured that the animals would continue to offer themselves to hunters in the future. Disrespecting an animal's spirit could bring bad luck or cause the animals to stay away. Shamans played an important role in Thule society. These spiritual specialists could communicate with the spirit world, heal the sick, and ensure good fortune for the community. Shamans might enter trance states through drumming, singing, or other techniques. In these trances, they could travel to the spirit world, negotiate with powerful beings, and bring back knowledge or power. The shaman's role was essential for maintaining balance between the human and spirit worlds. The Thule expansion across the Arctic was one of the most rapid and successful human migrations in history. Starting around 1,000 years ago, Thule people began moving eastward from Alaska. Within just a few centuries, they had spread across the entire North American Arctic and into Greenland. This expansion covered thousands of miles of some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. Several factors contributed to the success of the Thule expansion. Their whale hunting technology gave them access to enormous food resources. Their sophisticated clothing and housing allowed them to survive in any Arctic environment. Their use of dog sleds provided rapid transportation across the ice and snow, and the medieval warm period may have opened new areas to whale migration, drawing the Thule eastward in pursuit of their prey. As the Thule expanded, they encountered the Dorset people who had lived in the eastern Arctic for nearly 2,000 years. The meeting of these two peoples is one of the great mysteries of Arctic history. There is little evidence of conflict or warfare between them. Instead, the Dorset seem to have simply faded away as the Thule expanded. Some scholars believe the Dorset were absorbed into Thule communities. Others think they retreated to marginal areas where they eventually died out. The Thule remembered the Dorset in their oral traditions. Stories spoke of the Inuit, a people who had lived in the land before the Inuit arrived. The Inuit were described as tall, strong and shy. They were said to be excellent hunters, but not skilled at making tools. When the Inuit arrived, the Inuit fled, unable or unwilling to compete with the newcomers. These stories preserve a memory of the Dorset people, filtered through centuries of retelling. By around 500 years ago, the Thule had completely replaced the Dorset across the Arctic. The Thule culture then began to evolve into the regional variations that would become the different Inuit groups we know today. In some areas, whale hunting remained central to life. In others, people focused more on seals, caribou, or fish. But the basic patterns of Thule life, the technologies, the spiritual beliefs, and the social structures remained the foundation of Inuit culture. The Thule legacy lives on in every aspect of traditional Inuit life. The kayak and umiak, the toggling harpoon, the semi-subterranean house, the layered clothing system, all of these Thule innovations continued to be used by the Inuit for centuries. The Thule understanding of the Arctic environment, accumulated over generations, was passed down and expanded by their descendants. The Thule spiritual beliefs evolved into the rich religious traditions of the Inuit. Understanding the Thule helps us appreciate the sophistication of Inuit culture. These were not primitive people struggling to survive in a harsh environment. They were innovative, adaptable, and highly successful. They developed technologies that allowed them to thrive where others could not survive. They created art, music, and spiritual traditions of great depth and beauty. The Thule were the architects of a way of life that would endure for 1,000 years. The Arctic is one of the most challenging environments on Earth for human survival. Temperatures can plunge to 60 degrees below zero. The sun disappears entirely for months during winter, plunging the land into continuous darkness. Blizzards can strike with little warning, reducing visibility to nothing and making travel deadly. Food is scarce and difficult to obtain. There are no trees for building shelter or making fire. Most of the landscape is covered in ice and snow for much of the year. Yet the Inuit not only survived in this environment but thrived. They developed an intimate knowledge of the Arctic world and created technologies perfectly adapted to its challenges. Their success is a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience. Understanding how the Inuit survived in the Arctic reveals the genius of their culture and the depth of their connection to the land. The first challenge of Arctic survival is cold. The human body is designed for much warmer climates, and exposure to extreme cold can kill within minutes. The Inuit response to this challenge was their remarkable clothing system. Every piece of traditional Inuit clothing was carefully designed to trap warm air close to the body while allowing moisture to escape. The basic principle of Inuit clothing was layering. The inner layer, worn against the skin, was typically made from caribou fawn skin with the fur facing inward. Caribou fur is hollow, which gives it excellent insulating properties. The soft, fine fur of young caribou was especially prized for its warmth and comfort. This inner layer created a pocket of warm air around the body. The outer layer was made from adult caribou skin or seal skin, with the fur facing outward. This layer served as a windbreak, preventing cold air from penetrating to the inner layer. It also shed snow and ice, keeping the wearer dry. The outer layer was often decorated with bands of contrasting fur or embroidered designs, making the clothing beautiful as well as functional. The parka was the most important piece of Inuit clothing. This hooded jacket extended below the waist and could be pulled tight around the face, leaving only a small opening for the eyes and nose. Women's parkas often had a large hood called an amautic, designed to carry a baby against the mother's back. The baby would be kept warm by the mother's body heat, protected from the cold by the layers of fur. Pants were made from caribou or polar bear skin, with the fur facing inward for warmth. They were held up by a drawstring at the waist and often extended down to meet the boots. The junction between pants and boots was carefully designed to prevent cold air from entering. Boots, called kamiks, were essential for Arctic survival. They were typically made from seal skin, which is naturally waterproof. The soles were made from tough bearded seal skin, which provided grip on ice and snow. Inside the boots, people wore socks made from caribou fur or dried grass. The grass socks were especially valued because they absorbed moisture from the feet and could be dried out each evening. Mittens were large and roomy, allowing the wearer to pull their hands inside for extra warmth. They were often attached to the parka sleeves with cords, preventing them from being lost. Some mittens had a slit in the palm, allowing the wearer to extend their fingers for fine work without removing the mitten entirely. The Inuit also wore snow goggles to protect their eyes from snow blindness. The intense reflection of sunlight off snow can cause painful and dangerous damage to the eyes. Inuit snow goggles were carved from bone, ivory, or wood, with narrow slits that reduced the amount of light reaching the eyes while still allowing the wearer to see. All of this clothing was made by women who were highly skilled seamstresses. Creating a complete set of winter clothing required hundreds of hours of work. Women would prepare the skins by scraping, stretching, and softening them. They would cut the pieces using patterns passed down through generations. They would sew the pieces together using needles made from bone and thread made from caribou sinew. The quality of the sewing was crucial. Poorly sewn seams could let in cold air or allow water to penetrate. A hunter whose clothing failed in the middle of a winter storm could easily die. Women took great pride in their sewing skills, and a well-made parka was a work of art as well as a life-saving garment. Shelter was another crucial element of Arctic survival. The Inuit developed several types of dwellings, each suited to different conditions and seasons. The most famous is the igloo, or snow house, which has become an iconic symbol of Inuit culture. The igloo is a brilliant solution to the problem of shelter in a land without trees. It is made entirely from blocks of compacted snow, cut from drifts and arranged in a rising spiral. As each block is placed, it leans slightly inward, creating a dome that is remarkably strong and stable. The entrance is placed below the level of the floor, so cold air cannot flow into the living space. Building an igloo requires skill and practice. An experienced builder can construct a small igloo in an hour or two, while a larger family dwelling might take several hours. The builder must choose the right type of snow, neither too soft nor too hard. They must cut the blocks to the right size and shape. They must place each block at exactly the right angle. A poorly built igloo will collapse or let in cold air. Inside, the igloo is surprisingly warm and comfortable. Body heat and oil lamps can raise the temperature to well above freezing, even when outside temperatures are far below zero. The snow walls actually provide excellent insulation, trapping warm air inside. A raised sleeping platform keeps people off the cold floor. Furs and skins provide additional insulation and comfort. Igloos were typically used as temporary shelters during winter hunting trips or travel. For more permanent winter dwellings, many Inuit groups built semi-subterranean houses similar to those of their Thule ancestors. These houses were partially dug into the ground, with walls of stone, sod, and whalebones. The earth provided insulation, and a long entrance tunnel prevented cold air from entering the living space. In summer, when the snow melted and the ground thawed, the Inuit lived in tents made from animal skins. These tents were light and portable, perfect for the mobile lifestyle of summer hunting and fishing. They could be set up quickly and taken down just as fast, allowing families to follow the animals they hunted. Food was perhaps the greatest challenge of Arctic survival. The Arctic environment produces very little plant food. There are no grains, no fruits, no vegetables as people in other climates know them. The brief Arctic summer produces some berries, roots and greens, but these are available for only a few weeks each year. For most of the year, the Inuit diet consisted almost entirely of meat and fat. This meat-based diet might seem unhealthy by modern standards, but it was actually well suited to Arctic conditions. Meat provided the protein needed for survival, while fat was essential for warmth and energy. In the extreme cold of the Arctic, the human body burns enormous amounts of calories just to maintain body temperature. Fat is the most efficient source of these calories, providing more than twice as much energy per gram as protein or carbohydrates. The Inuit obtained their food through hunting and fishing. They hunted seals, walruses, whales, caribou, polar bears, muskoxen and birds. They fished for Arctic char, salmon and other species. They gathered eggs from bird colonies during the nesting season. Every source of food was precious and none was wasted. Seal hunting was the foundation of Inuit survival in most regions. Seals provided meat, fat and skins. They were available year-round, unlike many other animals that migrated with the seasons. The Inuit developed several techniques for hunting seals, each suited to different conditions. In winter, seals maintain breathing holes in the ice. They must surface regularly to breathe, and they keep these holes open even as the ice grows thicker. Inuit hunters would locate these breathing holes and wait patiently for a seal to appear. This required incredible patience, as a hunter might wait for hours in the bitter cold. When a seal finally surfaced, the hunter had only a moment to strike with their harpoon. In spring, seals haul out onto the ice to bask in the sun. Hunters would stalk these seals, crawling across the ice and imitating seal movements to avoid alarming their prey. When close enough, the hunter would strike quickly before the seal could escape into the water. In summer, hunters pursued seals in kayaks, harpooning them in the open water. This required great skill in both paddling and throwing. A kayak hunter had to approach close enough to strike while managing their small, unstable boat. They had to be ready to deal with a wounded seal that might try to capsize them. Caribou were another crucial resource for the Inuit. These animals provided meat, but their skins were even more valuable. Caribou fur is the finest insulation available in the Arctic, and caribou skin clothing was essential for winter survival. The Inuit hunted caribou during their seasonal migrations, when large herds moved across the tundra. Caribou hunting often involved driving the animals into water, where they were vulnerable and could be easily killed from kayaks. Hunters would work together, some driving the herd while others waited at the water crossing. This cooperative hunting required careful planning and coordination. Whale hunting was practiced by some Inuit groups, particularly those living along coasts where whales migrated. As described earlier, whale hunting was a complex, dangerous undertaking that required specialized equipment and extensive knowledge. But the rewards were enormous. A single whale could feed a community for months. The Inuit developed sophisticated techniques for preserving food. In the Arctic climate, freezing was the most common method. Meat could be stored in ice cellars, dug into the permafrost, where it would remain frozen year-round. Dried meat and fish were also common, prepared during the summer months when the sun provided warmth for drying. Fermented meat was another important preserved food, valued for its distinctive flavour and nutritional properties. Water was another challenge in the Arctic. Although surrounded by ice and snow, obtaining drinkable water required effort. Snow must be melted before it can be drunk, and melting snow requires fuel. The Inuit used oil lamps burning seal or whale blubber to melt snow for drinking water. In summer, streams and ponds provided fresh water, but in winter, melting snow or ice was the only option. Transportation was essential for survival in the Arctic. The Inuit needed to travel long distances to find food, visit other communities, and trade goods. They developed two main forms of transportation: boats for water travel and dog sleds for travel over ice and snow. The kayak was the primary boat for individual travel and hunting. These small enclosed boats were fast, maneuverable, and seaworthy. A skilled kayaker could travel great distances, hunt sea mammals, and survive capsizing in frigid waters. The kayak's design was refined over centuries to achieve near-perfect efficiency. The umiak was a larger boat used for transporting families and goods. These open boats could carry heavy loads and were propelled by paddles or sometimes sails. Umiaks were used for whale hunting, for moving between seasonal camps, and for trading expeditions. The dog sled was the primary means of land transportation. Inuit dogs were bred for strength, endurance, and ability to survive in extreme cold. A team of dogs could pull a sled loaded with hundreds of pounds of gear across ice and snow. Dog sleds allowed the Inuit to travel great distances quickly, to transport heavy loads of meat from hunting sites, and to maintain contact with distant communities. Caring for sled dogs was a significant responsibility. Dogs needed to be fed, which meant catching extra food during hunting trips. They needed to be trained to work as a team. They needed shelter from the worst weather, but in return, they provided transportation that made Arctic life possible. Navigation was another crucial survival skill. The Arctic landscape can seem featureless to outsiders, an endless expanse of white with few landmarks. But the Inuit learned to read subtle signs that guided their travels. They observed the shapes of snowdrifts, which were formed by prevailing winds and thus indicated direction. They watched the stars, the sun, and the moon. They noted the behaviour of animals and the patterns of ice and water. Inuit hunters could travel hundreds of miles across seemingly trackless ice and snow, finding their way to hunting grounds and back home again. This navigational ability was not mysterious or magical, but was based on careful observation and accumulated knowledge. Elders taught young people to read the signs of the land, passing down knowledge that had been gathered over generations. The Inuit also developed sophisticated knowledge of weather patterns. In the Arctic, weather can change rapidly and dramatically. A clear day can turn into a deadly blizzard within hours. The Inuit learned to read the signs that predicted weather changes, observing clouds, wind patterns, and animal behaviour. This knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Safety was always a concern in the Arctic. The environment posed constant dangers, from thin ice to sudden storms, to encounters with polar bears. The Inuit developed practices and protocols to minimise these dangers. They tested ice before crossing it. They travelled in groups when possible. They carried emergency supplies. They knew when to seek shelter and wait out bad weather. Despite all precautions, accidents and tragedies did occur. People fell through ice, were caught in storms, or were injured in hunting accidents. The Arctic was unforgiving, and mistakes could be fatal. But the Inuit developed resilience in the face of these dangers. They learned from accidents and passed on lessons to future generations. They supported each other through hardships, sharing food and shelter with those in need. The community was the ultimate safety net, and no one was left to face the Arctic alone. The survival skills of the Inuit were not static, but evolved over generations. Each generation added to the accumulated knowledge of their ancestors. New techniques were developed, old methods were refined, and knowledge was constantly tested against the harsh realities of the Arctic environment. This process of continuous improvement created a body of survival knowledge unmatched anywhere in the world. The Inuit relationship with the Arctic was not one of conquest, but of adaptation. They did not try to change the environment to suit their needs. Instead, they changed themselves, developing the skills, technologies, and mindset needed to live in harmony with the land. This approach required humility, patience, and deep respect for the natural world. Modern scientists and explorers have marvelled at Inuit survival skills. Many early European expeditions to the Arctic ended in disaster because the explorers refused to learn from the Inuit. Those who did adopt Inuit techniques, wearing Inuit clothing, eating Inuit food, and travelling by Inuit methods, were far more likely to survive. The Inuit had solved the puzzle of Arctic survival over thousands of years, and their solutions remain relevant today. The survival skills of the Inuit represent one of humanity's greatest achievements. In an environment that seems designed to kill humans, the Inuit not only survived but created a rich and vibrant culture. Their success demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of the human species and the power of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. The daily life of the Inuit was shaped by the rhythms of the Arctic seasons. The endless days of summer and the long darkness of winter created a pattern of life, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Understanding this daily rhythm helps us appreciate how the Inuit lived, worked, and found joy in their challenging environments. The Arctic year can be divided into several distinct seasons, each with its own activities and challenges. Winter brought the coldest temperatures and the longest nights. The sun would disappear below the horizon for weeks or even months, depending on how far north a community lived. During this time, the Inuit focused on seal hunting at breathing holes, on maintaining their equipment, and on the social activities that helped pass the long dark hours. A typical winter day began slowly. There was no sunrise to mark the morning, only the gradual lightening of the sky during the brief twilight hours. Families would wake in their warm homes, whether igloos, sod houses, or other dwellings. They would eat a meal of stored meat or fresh seal, drink melted snow water, and prepare for the day's activities. Men would typically head out to hunt, often travelling to seal breathing holes they had identified earlier. They might be gone for many hours, waiting patiently in the cold for a seal to surface. Women would stay closer to home, caring for children, sewing clothing, preparing food, and maintaining the household. Children would play, learn skills from their parents, and help with age-appropriate tasks. As the brief twilight faded back into darkness, hunters would return home. If the hunt had been successful, there would be fresh meat to share. The family would gather together, eating, talking, and enjoying each other's company. Stories might be told, songs might be sung, and games might be played. These evening hours were precious times of warmth and connection. Sleep in the Arctic winter was not governed by the sun. People slept when they were tired and woke when they were rested. Without the daily cycle of light and darkness, sleep patterns could be flexible. Some people might sleep for long periods during the darkest months, conserving energy when food was scarce and there was little to do. Spring brought the return of the sun and a dramatic increase in activity. As daylight hours lengthened, the Inuit would begin preparing for the busy months ahead. Hunters would shift their focus to seals basking on the ice, which were easier to hunt than seals at breathing holes. Families would begin thinking about moving to spring and summer camps. The spring seal hunt was a crucial time. Seals were fat from winter feeding, and their skins were in prime condition. Hunters worked long hours to take as many seals as possible. The meat and blubber would be stored for later use, and the skins would be prepared for making clothing, boats, and other essential items. Spring was also a time for socializing. As travel became easier, families would visit each other, renewing relationships that had been limited during the winter months. Young people might meet potential marriage partners from other communities. Trade goods would be exchanged. News and stories would be shared. Summer was the season of abundance and activity. The sun would shine for 24 hours a day, and the temperature would rise above freezing. The snow would melt, revealing the tundra beneath. Plants would burst into bloom, and animals would be everywhere. This was the time to gather as much food as possible for the coming winter. Summer activities varied by region, but often included fishing, caribou hunting, and gathering plant foods. Families would move to summer camps near good fishing spots or along caribou migration routes. They would live in skin tents, moving as needed to follow the food sources. Fishing was especially important during summer. Arctic char, salmon, and other fish would run up rivers and streams in enormous numbers. The Inuit would catch them using nets, weirs, and spears. Some fish would be eaten fresh, but most would be dried for storage. Dried fish was a staple food during the winter months. Caribou hunting reached its peak in late summer and early fall. The caribou herds would be migrating south, their coats thick and prime for making winter clothing. Hunters would intercept the herds at river crossings or other predictable locations. The meat would be dried or cached in stone structures for later retrieval. The skins would be carefully prepared for making parkas, pants, and boots. Women were busy throughout the summer preparing skins and sewing clothing. Making a complete set of winter clothing for one person required many caribou skins and hundreds of hours of work. Women would work together, sharing the labour and teaching young girls the essential skills of skin preparation and sewing. Summer was also a time for berry picking and gathering other plant foods. Although plants made up a small part of the Inuit diet, they were valued for variety and nutrition. Berries, roots, and greens were eaten fresh or preserved for later use. Some plants had medicinal uses and were carefully gathered and stored. Fall marked the transition back to winter. The days grew shorter, the temperature dropped, and the sea began to freeze. Families would return to their winter camps, often the same locations used by their ancestors for generations. They would prepare their winter homes, check their equipment, and settle in for the long cold months ahead. The fall was also a time for hunting sea mammals, from kayaks, before the ice closed in. Seals, walruses, and sometimes whales were taken during this period. The meat and blubber would be crucial for winter survival. The last hunts of fall were often the most important of the year. Family structure among the Inuit was centered on the nuclear family of parents and children, but extended family relationships were also crucial. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all played important roles in daily life. Children might be raised by relatives if their parents died or were unable to care for them. Elders were respected for their knowledge and experience. Marriage among the Inuit was typically arranged by families, though the wishes of the young people were usually considered. A young man would need to prove his ability to provide for a family before he could marry. This meant demonstrating skill in hunting and the ability to make and maintain the equipment needed for survival. A young woman would need to show her skills in sewing, food preparation, and other domestic tasks. Marriages were economic partnerships as much as romantic relationships. A husband and wife depended on each other for survival. The husband provided food through hunting, while the wife processed the food, made clothing, and maintained the household. Neither could survive long without the other. This mutual dependence created strong bonds between married couples. Children were greatly valued in Inuit society. They represented the future of the community and were treated with affection and patience. Inuit child-rearing practices emphasized learning through observation and practice rather than formal instruction or punishment. Children were allowed considerable freedom to explore and experiment, learning from their mistakes. From an early age, children began learning the skills they would need as adults. Boys would accompany their fathers on hunting trips, first as observers and then as participants. They would learn to handle dogs, paddle kayaks, throw harpoons, and read the signs of weather and ice. Girls would learn from their mothers how to prepare skins, sew clothing, process food, and manage a household. Play was an important part of childhood, and many Inuit games were designed to develop skills useful in adult life. Boys might play with small harpoons, practicing their throwing accuracy. Girls might play with dolls, practicing the care of infants. Both boys and girls played games that developed strength, agility, and endurance. Elders held a special place in Inuit society. In a culture where survival depended on accumulated knowledge, those who had lived longest had the most to teach. Elders were the keepers of oral traditions, the repositories of hunting knowledge, and the advisors on matters of community concern. Their opinions carried great weight in community decisions. The treatment of elders reflected the harsh realities of Arctic life. In times of plenty, elders were cared for and respected, but in times of severe scarcity, when there was not enough food for everyone, difficult decisions sometimes had to be made. Some accounts describe elders voluntarily staying behind when a group moved, accepting death so that younger members could survive. These decisions were not made lightly, but reflected the brutal calculus of survival in an unforgiving environment. Gender roles in traditional Inuit society were clearly defined but complementary. Men were primarily responsible for hunting, building shelters, and making tools and weapons. Women were primarily responsible for processing food, making clothing, and caring for children. But these divisions were not absolute. Women sometimes hunted, especially for small game. Men sometimes helped with domestic tasks. The goal was survival, and everyone contributed what they could. Women's work was highly valued in Inuit society. A skilled seamstress was as essential to survival as a skilled hunter. Without proper clothing, no one could survive the Arctic winter. Without properly prepared food, no one could maintain their strength. The work of women was recognized as equal in importance to the work of men. Leadership in Inuit communities was informal and based on respect rather than formal authority. There were no chiefs or kings in traditional Inuit society. Instead, individuals who demonstrated wisdom, skill, and good judgment were looked to for guidance. These informal leaders might organize hunting expeditions, mediate disputes, or make decisions about when and where to move camp. Decision-making was typically by consensus. Important matters would be discussed by the community, with everyone having a chance to express their views. The goal was to reach agreement that everyone could support. This process could be slow, but it ensured that decisions had broad support and that everyone felt heard. Conflict within communities was handled through various mechanisms. Minor disputes might be resolved through discussion or mediation by respected elders. More serious conflicts might be addressed through song duels, in which the parties would compose and perform mocking songs about each other. The community would judge the performances, and the better singer was considered the winner. This method allowed conflicts to be resolved without violence. Violence was relatively rare in traditional Inuit society, but it did occur. Murders sometimes happened, often related to disputes over women or resources. The response to murder varied. Sometimes the killer would be ostracized or killed by relatives of the victim. Sometimes compensation would be paid. The lack of formal legal systems meant that responses to violence were often unpredictable. Hospitality was a fundamental value in Inuit society. Travellers were always welcomed and fed, even by strangers. This hospitality was not merely generosity, but was essential for survival. Anyone might need help from others at some point, and the expectation of reciprocity ensured that help would be available when needed. Sharing was another core value. When a hunter killed a large animal, the meat would be distributed throughout the community according to established customs. Different parts of the animal went to different people based on their relationship to the hunter. This sharing ensured that everyone had food, even those who were unable to hunt for themselves. The daily life of the Inuit was hard by modern standards. There was constant work to be done, constant challenges to overcome. But there was also joy, laughter, and love. Families were close, communities were supportive, and people found meaning and satisfaction in their lives. The Inuit created not just a way of surviving, but a way of living that sustained them for thousands of years. Hunting was the foundation of Inuit life. Everything depended on the successful harvest of animals. Food, clothing, shelter, tools, light and heat all came from the animals the Inuit hunted. But hunting was more than just an economic activity. It was a spiritual practice, a way of relating to the natural world, and a source of identity and meaning. The Inuit did not see themselves as separate from the animals they hunted. They believed that humans and animals were connected, that they shared the same world and were subject to the same spiritual forces. Animals were not merely resources to be exploited, but were beings with their own spirits, their own intelligence, and their own agency. This understanding shaped every aspect of Inuit hunting practice. The most important belief about animals was that they gave themselves willingly to hunters. A seal did not die because a hunter was clever or skilled, although skill certainly helped. A seal died because it chose to offer itself to the hunter. This gift demanded respect and gratitude. If a hunter failed to show proper respect, the animals would stop offering themselves, and the community would starve. Respect for animals was shown in many ways. Hunters would speak to animals, thanking them for their sacrifice. They would treat animal bodies with care, avoiding waste and using every part. They would observe taboos and rituals designed to please the animal spirits. They would share meat generously, as the animals had shared themselves. One common practice was offering fresh water to a killed seal. Seals live in salt water and were believed to be thirsty for fresh water. By giving a drink to a killed seal, the hunter showed respect and ensured that the seal's spirit would be satisfied. The spirit would then return to be reborn and hunted again. Different animals required different forms of respect. Whales were treated with particular reverence because of their size and importance. After a successful whale hunt, elaborate ceremonies might be held to honour the whale's spirit. The whale's skull might be returned to the sea with prayers and offerings. These ceremonies ensured that whales would continue to offer themselves to hunters. Caribou were also treated with great respect. Hunters would avoid boasting about their success, as this might offend the caribou spirits. Caribou bones were carefully disposed of, often placed on elevated platforms where dogs could not reach them. Allowing dogs to chew caribou bones was considered disrespectful and might cause the caribou to stay away. Polar bears occupied a special place in Inuit beliefs. These powerful predators were seen as almost human, capable of understanding human speech and possessing great spiritual power. Hunting a polar bear was a significant achievement, and the bear's spirit required careful treatment. The bear's skull might be hung in a place of honour, and offerings might be made to its spirit. The relationship between hunters and animals was mediated by various spirits and supernatural beings. The most important of these was Sedna, the goddess of the sea. According to Inuit mythology, Sedna controlled all the sea mammals. If she was pleased, she would release the animals to be hunted. If she was angry, she would keep the animals hidden, and the people would starve. Sedna's anger could be caused by human misbehaviour, particularly violations of taboos. When hunting was poor, it was often attributed to Sedna's displeasure. Shamans would travel to her underwater home in trance states, seeking to discover the cause of her anger and appease her. They might comb her hair, which she could not do herself because she had no fingers, according to the myth. This act of service would please Sedna and convince her to release the animals. The mythology of Sedna explained the fundamental relationship between humans and animals. According to the most common version of the story, Sedna was a young woman who refused to marry. Her father eventually forced her to marry a bird spirit, but the marriage was unhappy. When her father tried to rescue her, the bird spirit caused a terrible storm. To save himself, the father threw Sedna overboard. When she tried to climb back into the boat, he cut off her fingers. These fingers became the seals, walruses, and whales. Sedna sank to the bottom of the sea, where she became the ruler of all sea creatures. This story taught important lessons. It explained why humans depended on sea mammals for survival. It established the relationship between human behaviour and hunting success. It gave meaning to the rituals and taboos that governed hunting, and it provided a framework for understanding misfortune and seeking remedies. Seal hunting was the most common and essential form of hunting for most Inuit groups. Seals provided meat, fat and skins. They were available year-round, unlike many other animals. The Inuit developed multiple techniques for hunting seals, each suited to different seasons and conditions. Winter seal hunting at breathing holes was perhaps the most challenging. Seals maintain holes in the ice through which they surface to breathe. A hunter would locate these holes, often with the help of dogs who could smell the seal's breath. The hunter would then wait beside the hole, sometimes for many hours, in temperatures far below zero. When a seal surfaced, the hunter had only a moment to strike with his harpoon. This form of hunting required incredible patience and endurance. The hunter could not move or make noise, as this would frighten the seal away. He could not leave to warm himself, as the seal might surface at any moment. He had to remain alert and ready, despite the cold and boredom. Successful breathing hole hunters were greatly admired for their patience and skill. Spring hunting of basking seals required different skills. In spring, seals haul out onto the ice to rest in the sun. They are alert and will flee into the water at the first sign of danger. Hunters would stalk these seals, crawling across the ice and imitating seal movements. When the seal raised its head to look around, the hunter would freeze. When the seal relaxed, the hunter would move closer. This stalking might continue for hours before the hunter was close enough to strike. Summer hunting from kayaks was the most exciting and dangerous form of seal hunting. Hunters would pursue seals in the open water, paddling their small boats with great skill. When close enough, the hunter would throw his harpoon, trying to strike the seal before it could dive. A wounded seal might try to escape, dragging the hunter and his kayak through the water. The hunter had to be prepared for anything, including the possibility of capsizing in frigid waters. Walrus hunting was practiced by Inuit groups living in areas where walruses were found. These large animals were valuable for their meat, blubber, ivory tusks, and tough hides, but they were also dangerous. A wounded walrus could easily destroy a kayak or umiak and kill the hunters inside. Walrus hunting was typically done from umiaks, which were more stable than kayaks and could carry multiple hunters. The crew would approach a group of walruses hauled out on ice or rocks. They would try to harpoon an animal before it could escape into the water. Once harpooned, the walrus would be held by the line while additional hunters struck it with lances. The entire crew had to work together, as a walrus could easily overpower a single hunter. Whale hunting was the most prestigious and rewarding form of hunting. A single bowhead whale could provide tons of meat and blubber, enough to feed a community for months. Whale bones were used for building houses, making tools, and creating art. Whale oil provided light and heat. But whale hunting was also the most dangerous, requiring large crews, specialized equipment, and extensive knowledge. Whale hunts were carefully organized events. The umiak captain, usually an experienced elder, would lead the crew. Each crew member had a specific role, from paddling to managing the harpoon lines to attaching floats. The crew would train together, practicing their coordination and timing. Before the hunt, rituals would be performed to ensure success and safety. When whales were spotted, the umiaks would set out in pursuit. The goal was to approach close enough for the harpooner to strike. This required skillful paddling, as whales are fast and can easily outdistance a skin boat. Once the first harpoon struck, floats would be attached to tire the whale. Additional harpoons would be thrown as the whale surfaced to breathe. Eventually, the exhausted whale could be approached for the kill. After a successful whale hunt, the entire community would participate in butchering and processing the animal. This was a time of celebration and plenty. Special portions would be distributed according to custom, with the captain, harpooner, and crew receiving shares. The whale spirit would be honoured with ceremonies and offerings. Caribou hunting was essential for obtaining the skins needed for winter clothing. Caribou meat was also an important food source, especially for inland Inuit groups who had limited access to sea mammals. The Inuit developed several techniques for hunting caribou, often involving cooperation among many hunters. One common technique was driving caribou into water. Caribou are strong swimmers, but they are vulnerable when swimming. Hunters would position themselves along a river or lake where caribou were known to cross during their migrations. Beaters would drive the herd toward the water, while hunters in kayaks waited to intercept them. The swimming caribou could be easily killed with spears. Another technique involved driving caribou into corrals or toward lines of stone cairns. The cairns, called Inuit, resembled human figures and would frighten the caribou, channeling them toward waiting hunters. This technique required extensive preparation, as the cairns had to be built and maintained. But it could result in large harvests that would provide food and skins for many families. Caribou were also hunted individually by stalking. Hunters would use the terrain to approach within range, then shoot the animal with a bow and arrow. This required patience and knowledge of caribou behavior. A skilled stalker could get very close to caribou by moving slowly and staying downwind. Polar bear hunting was relatively rare but highly prestigious. Polar bears are dangerous predators, capable of killing a human with a single blow. Hunting them required courage, skill, and careful preparation. Hunters might track a bear for days across the ice, waiting for the right opportunity to attack. When a polar bear was located, hunters would release their dogs to surround and distract it. The dogs would bark and snap at the bear, keeping it occupied while the hunters approached. When close enough, a hunter would strike with a spear or lance, trying to hit a vital spot. A wounded bear was extremely dangerous and might turn on the hunters. Successful polar bear hunters were greatly admired. The bear's skin was a valuable trophy, and its meat was shared throughout the community. The bear's spirit was treated with great respect, and rituals were performed to ensure that other bears would not be offended. Bird hunting provided variety in the Inuit diet and valuable materials for clothing and tools. Ducks, geese, and other waterfowl were hunted during their seasonal migrations. Seabirds were taken at their nesting colonies. Ptarmigan, a type of grouse, were hunted year-round. Birds were hunted using various methods. Nets were used to catch flying birds, especially at narrow passages where birds concentrated. Bowless, weighted strings thrown to entangle flying birds were also used. Hunters might also use bows and arrows, or simply grab birds by hand at crowded nesting sites. Bird eggs were an important seasonal food. During the nesting season, hunters would visit bird colonies to gather eggs. These eggs provided a welcome change from the meat-heavy diet of most of the year. They were eaten fresh or preserved for later use. Fishing was important for many Inuit groups, especially those living near rivers where salmon or Arctic char ran. Fish were caught using nets, weirs, and spears. During the spawning runs, fish were so abundant that large quantities could be caught and preserved for winter. Fish weirs were structures built across streams to trap fish. They were made from stones or stakes and required considerable effort to construct. Once built, they could be used year after year, providing a reliable source of food. Fish caught in weirs would be speared or netted. Ice fishing was practiced in winter when lakes and rivers were frozen. Hunters would cut holes in the ice and lower lines with baited hooks. They might also use a technique called jigging, in which a lure was moved up and down to attract fish. Ice fishing required patience, but could provide fresh food during the lean winter months. The hunting skills of the Inuit were developed over thousands of years. Each generation added to the accumulated knowledge, refining techniques and passing on wisdom. Young hunters learned from their fathers and other experienced hunters, absorbing knowledge through observation and practice. By the time they were adults, they possessed a deep understanding of animal behavior, environmental conditions, and hunting techniques. This knowledge was not written down, but was preserved in oral traditions. Stories about great hunters, about successful and unsuccessful hunts, about the behavior of animals, all serve to transmit knowledge to new generations. Elders were the repositories of this knowledge, and their teaching was essential for the survival of the community. The relationship between the Inuit and the animals they hunted was complex and multifaceted. It was economic, providing the resources needed for survival. It was spiritual, connecting humans to the natural world and the forces that governed it. It was social, defining roles and relationships within the community. And it was personal, giving hunters a sense of identity, purpose, and achievement. This relationship has been challenged by the modern world. Commercial hunting, environmental changes, and shifting values have all affected traditional hunting practices, but many Inuit continue to hunt, maintaining connections to their ancestors and their land. Hunting remains central to Inuit identity, even as the tools and techniques have changed. The spiritual world of the Inuit was rich, complex, and deeply integrated into daily life. Every aspect of existence had spiritual dimensions. Animals, natural phenomena, and even objects possessed spirits that demanded attention and respect. Understanding these beliefs helps us appreciate the depth of Inuit culture and the worldview that sustained them through thousands of years of Arctic life. At the heart of Inuit spirituality was the concept of Inua, the spirit or soul that inhabited all things. Humans had Inua, but so did animals, plants, rocks, and natural forces. The wind had Inua, the moon had Inua, a harpoon might have Inua. This belief created a world that was alive with spiritual presence, where humans were surrounded by countless other beings with their own awareness and agency. The Inua of animals was particularly important. Because animals gave themselves to hunters, their spirits had to be treated with respect. Proper treatment ensured that the animal's Inua would be satisfied and would return to be reborn. Improper treatment could offend the spirit, causing it to warn other animals to stay away. The success or failure of hunting depended largely on how well hunters maintained their relationships with animal spirits. Beyond the Inua of individual things, the Inuit believed in various supernatural beings who influenced the world. These beings ranged from helpful spirits who aided hunters to dangerous entities who caused illness and misfortune. Understanding and managing relationships with these beings was essential for survival. Sedna, the sea goddess, was the most important supernatural being for many Inuit groups. As described earlier, she controlled all the sea mammals and could release or withhold them based on human behaviour. When hunting was poor, it was often attributed to Sedna's displeasure. Rituals and ceremonies were performed to appease her and convince her to release the animals. The moon spirit was another important supernatural being. In Inuit mythology, the moon was a male spirit who controlled the land animals, particularly caribou. The moon spirit was also associated with fertility and was invoked by women who wished to become pregnant. The relationship between the sun and moon was explained through mythology, often involving a brother and sister who became the sun and moon after a tragic incident. Various other spirits populated the Inuit supernatural world. There were spirits of the air, spirits of the land, and spirits of particular places. Some of these spirits were helpful, providing guidance or assistance to humans. Others were dangerous, causing illness, accidents, or death. Navigating this spiritual landscape required knowledge, caution, and the assistance of those who could communicate with the spirit world. The most important spiritual specialists in Inuit society were the shamans, known as angakuk in many Inuit languages. Shamans were individuals who had special abilities to communicate with spirits, travel to other worlds, and manipulate supernatural forces. They served as intermediaries between the human community and the spirit world. Becoming a shaman was not a matter of choice. Shamanic abilities were believed to be given by the spirits, often through a dramatic experience such as a serious illness, a near-death experience, or a vision. A person who received this calling could not refuse it without suffering serious consequences. They had to accept their role and develop their abilities through training and practice. Shamanic training involved learning to enter trance states in which the shaman spirit could leave their body and travel to other realms. This was achieved through various techniques including drumming, singing, fasting, and isolation. In trance, the shaman could visit the underwater realm of Sedna, the sky world of the moon spirit, or other supernatural locations. They could communicate with spirits, negotiate on behalf of their community, and bring back knowledge or power. Shamans had several important functions in Inuit society. One was healing the sick. Illness was often attributed to spiritual causes, such as the intrusion of a harmful spirit or the loss of the patient's soul. A shaman would diagnose the cause of the illness through divination or trance, then take action to address it. This might involve extracting the harmful spirit, retrieving the lost soul, or identifying and correcting a taboo violation. Another important function was ensuring hunting success. When animals were scarce, a shaman might journey to Sedna's underwater home to discover why she was withholding the animals. The shaman would appease her, perhaps by combing her tangled hair, and convince her to release the sea mammals. Upon returning from trance, the shaman would report what they had learned and what the community needed to do to restore good hunting. Shamans also provided guidance on important decisions, predicted the future, and protected the community from supernatural threats. They might be consulted before a hunting expedition, a journey, or any other significant undertaking. Their advice was valued because they had access to knowledge that ordinary people could not obtain. The shaman's most important tool was the drum. Inuit drums were large, flat instruments made from a wooden frame with a membrane of caribou or sealskin stretched across it. The drum was beaten with a stick, producing a deep, resonant sound that helped induce trance states. Drumming was often accompanied by singing, with the shaman chanting songs that had been given to them by their spirit helpers. Shamanic performances were dramatic events that involved the entire community. The shaman might perform in a darkened house, with the audience gathered around. As the drumming and singing continued, the shaman would enter trance, their body convulsing or becoming rigid. They might speak in strange voices representing the spirits they encountered. They might perform seemingly impossible feats, such as being bound with ropes and then escaping, or stabbing themselves without injury. These performances were not mere entertainment, but were serious spiritual work. The community witnessed the shaman's journey to other worlds and the negotiations that took place there. They heard the voices of spirits and received messages from the supernatural realm. The performance reinforced beliefs, provided explanations for misfortune, and offered hope for improvements. Not all shamans were equally powerful or respected. Some were known for their ability to heal, others for their skill in finding game, others for their power to harm enemies. Some shamans were feared as much as respected, believed to be capable of using their powers for evil as well as good. A shaman who was believed to have caused harm might face retaliation from the community. The relationship between shamans and ordinary people was complex. Shamans were needed and valued for their abilities, but they were also somewhat set apart from normal society. Their experiences in the spirit world gave them knowledge and perspectives that others did not share. They might behave in unusual ways, following instructions from their spirit helpers that seemed strange to others. Beyond the work of shamans, ordinary people also engaged in spiritual practices. Everyone observed taboos, performed rituals, and sought to maintain good relationships with the spirits. These practices were woven into daily life, not separate from it. Spiritual concerns were as real and pressing as physical needs. Taboos were rules governing behaviour that, if violated, could offend the spirits and bring misfortune. There were many taboos covering all aspects of life. Some taboos related to hunting, specifying how animals should be treated, what could be eaten, and when hunting could take place. Other taboos related to birth, death, and other life transitions. Still others governed the mixing of sea and land, which were considered spiritually incompatible. One common taboo prohibited working on caribou skins while living on the sea ice. Caribou were land animals, and their spirits might be offended by being brought into the domain of sea mammals. Similarly, seal meat and caribou meat might need to be kept separate and eaten at different times. These taboos reflected the belief that different categories of animals had different spiritual requirements. Violation of taboos could have serious consequences. The offended spirits might cause illness, accidents, or poor hunting. The effects might fall not just on the violator, but on the entire community. When misfortune struck, people would examine their behaviour, trying to identify what taboo might have been broken. Confession of violations was sometimes required to restore spiritual balance. Rituals marked important events and transitions. When a boy killed his first seal, rituals celebrated this achievement and ensured that seals would continue to offer themselves to him. When a girl had her first menstruation, rituals marked her transition to womanhood. When someone died, rituals helped their spirit journey to the afterlife and protected the living from harm. Death rituals were particularly important. The Inuit believed that the spirits of the dead could be dangerous if not properly handled. The body was typically removed from the dwelling through a special opening, not the regular entrance, to confuse the spirit and prevent it from returning. The body might be placed on the ground and covered with stones, or left in a remote location. Personal possessions might be destroyed or placed with the body. Mourning practices varied but often included periods of restricted activity and special behaviours. Mourners might avoid certain foods, refrain from hunting, or observe other restrictions. The name of the deceased might not be spoken for a period of time. These practices helped the living cope with loss while managing the spiritual dangers associated with death. The afterlife in Inuit belief was not a single destination, but varied depending on how a person died and how they had lived. Some versions described a pleasant afterlife for those who died violently, such as in hunting accidents or childbirth. Others described a less pleasant existence for those who died of old age or illness. The details varied among different Inuit groups, but the belief in some form of continued existence after death was widespread. Reincarnation was another common belief. The spirits of the dead were thought to be reborn in new bodies, often within the same family. A child might be given the name of a recently deceased relative and was believed to carry something of that person's spirit. This belief created continuity between generations and lessened the finality of death. The deceased lived on through their namesakes, and the community maintained its connection to ancestors across time. Names held tremendous spiritual power in Inuit culture. A name was not simply a label but carried the essence of all who had borne it before. When a child received the name of a deceased relative, they inherited something of that person's identity, skills, and spiritual protection. The child might be addressed using kinship terms appropriate to the original name bearer. For example, a grandmother might call her granddaughter mother if the child bore the grandmother's mother's name. This naming practice created complex webs of relationship and identity. A single person might carry multiple names, each connecting them to different ancestors and different spiritual legacies. The names provided protection and guidance, linking the living to the accumulated wisdom and power of those who came before. The spiritual beliefs of the Inuit were not static doctrines but living traditions that varied from region to region and evolved over time. Different communities emphasized different spirits, observed different taboos, and practiced different rituals. Yet underlying these variations were common themes: the belief in spirits inhabiting all things, the importance of maintaining proper relationships with the supernatural world, and the role of shamans as intermediaries between realms. These beliefs provided a framework for understanding the world and humanity's place within it. They explained why misfortune occurred and offered ways to address it. They gave meaning to daily activities and connected individuals to something larger than themselves. They created a sense of order in an environment that could seem chaotic and unpredictable. The arrival of Christianity would eventually challenge and transform these traditional beliefs. Missionaries brought new ideas about the supernatural, new explanations for misfortune, and new rituals and practices. The encounter between Inuit spirituality and Christianity was complex, involving both conflict and synthesis. Many Inuit today identify as Christian while also maintaining connections to traditional beliefs and practices. Understanding Inuit spirituality helps us appreciate the richness of their culture. These were not simple people with primitive superstitions, but sophisticated thinkers who had developed a comprehensive worldview suited to their environment and way of life. Their spiritual beliefs were integrated with their practical knowledge, their social organization, and their artistic expression. Together, these elements created a culture of remarkable depth and resilience. The Inuit created art of extraordinary beauty and power. Working with the materials available in their Arctic environment, they produced carvings, clothing, and other objects that combined practical function with aesthetic excellence. Their music filled the long winter nights with rhythm and song. Their oral traditions preserved history, transmitted knowledge, and entertained audiences across generations. These creative expressions reveal the inner life of Inuit culture, the values, beliefs, and experiences that shaped their world. Carving was the most distinctive Inuit art form. Using ivory from walrus tusks, bone from whales and other animals, antler from caribou, and stone from the Arctic landscape, Inuit artists created sculptures that captured the essence of their subjects. Animals were favourite subjects, depicted with accuracy and sensitivity that reflected the intimate knowledge hunters had of their prey. Human figures showed people engaged in daily activities or transformed by spiritual experiences. Supernatural beings took visible form in carvings that made the invisible world tangible. The tradition of carving extends back thousands of years. Archaeological sites have yielded carved objects from the earliest Paleo-Eskimo cultures. The Dorset people, who preceded the Thule in the eastern Arctic, were particularly accomplished carvers. Their small ivory and bone figures depicted animals, humans, and spirit beings with remarkable skill. Many Dorset carvings appear to have had spiritual significance, perhaps serving as amulets or ritual objects. The Thule ancestors of the modern Inuit continued the carving tradition, though their style differed from the Dorset. Thule carvings tended to be more functional, decorating tools and utensils rather than existing as independent art objects. Harpoon heads, needle cases, and other implements were adorned with carved designs. These decorations were not merely aesthetic, but often had spiritual significance, helping to ensure success in hunting or other activities. Traditional Inuit carving was done primarily by men, though women also created artistic objects. The carver would select a piece of material, studying its shape and grain to determine what it might become. Ivory and bone were worked with stone tools, later replaced by metal tools obtained through trade. The carver would cut, scrape, and polish the material, gradually revealing the form hidden within. The subjects of traditional carvings reflected Inuit life and beliefs. Seals, walruses, polar bears, and whales appeared frequently, depicted in realistic poses that showed the carver's deep familiarity with these animals. Human figures engaged in hunting, kayaking, or domestic activities. Shamanic imagery showed transformation and spiritual journeying. Some carvings depicted scenes from mythology or oral traditions. Carvings served various purposes in traditional Inuit society. Some were amulets, believed to provide protection or ensure success. A hunter might carry a small carved seal to help attract real seals. A woman might wear a carved figure to ensure fertility or protect her children. These amulets were personal and powerful, connecting the wearer to spiritual forces. Other carvings were toys for children, teaching them about animals and adult activities through play. Miniature kayaks, sleds, and hunting equipment helped children learn the shapes and functions of these important objects. Animal figures allowed children to act out hunting scenes, practicing in imagination what they would later do in reality. Some carvings were purely decorative, created for the pleasure of making and viewing beautiful objects. The long winter nights provided time for creative work, and carving was a way to pass the hours productively. Finished carvings might be given as gifts, strengthening social bonds between individuals and families. The arrival of Europeans created new markets for Inuit carving. Explorers, whalers, and traders were fascinated by Inuit art and eager to acquire examples. The Inuit began producing carvings specifically for trade, adapting their traditional skills to meet outside demand. This commercial carving would eventually become an important source of income for many Inuit communities. In the 20th century, Inuit carving gained recognition as fine art. Galleries and museums began collecting and displaying Inuit sculptures. Artists like Kenowaka and Pitsiolaka Shuna became internationally famous. The Canadian government actively promoted Inuit art, establishing cooperatives and marketing programs. Today, Inuit carving is recognized worldwide as a distinctive and valuable art form. Contemporary Inuit artists work in both traditional and innovative styles. Some continue to create sculptures in ivory, bone, and stone, using techniques passed down through generations. Others experiment with new materials and forms, pushing the boundaries of what Inuit art can be. The tradition remains vital and evolving, connecting the present to the deep past while looking toward the future. Beyond carving, the Inuit created beauty in many other forms. Clothing was not merely functional, but was also an expression of artistic skill and aesthetic sensibility. Women took great pride in their sewing, creating garments that were both practical and beautiful. Parkas were decorated with bands of contrasting fur, creating geometric patterns. Boots were adorned with intricate designs. Every piece of clothing reflected the maker's skill and taste. The decoration of clothing followed traditional patterns that varied by region and community. Certain designs were associated with particular families or groups. The patterns carried meaning, identifying the wearer's origin and affiliations. A knowledgeable observer could read much information from the decoration on a person's clothing. Skin preparation was an essential step in creating beautiful clothing. Women would scrape, stretch, and soften skins using techniques perfected over generations. The quality of the prepared skin determined the quality of the finished garment. Master skin workers were highly respected for their skill. Sewing techniques were equally important. Inuit women developed stitches that were not only strong but also waterproof. The seams of boots and other garments had to keep out water while withstanding constant use. Achieving this required great skill and attention to detail. Young girls learned these techniques from their mothers and grandmothers, practicing for years before they could produce work of the highest quality. Beadwork became an important decorative art after contact with Europeans, who introduced glass beads through trade. Inuit women incorporated beads into their traditional designs, creating new forms of beauty while maintaining connections to older patterns. Beadwork adorned clothing, bags, and other objects, adding colour and sparkle to the Arctic world. Tattooing was another traditional art form. Both men and women might receive tattoos, though the practice was more common among women. Tattoos were created by drawing a needle threaded with soot-blackened sinew under the skin, leaving permanent marks. The designs were typically geometric, consisting of lines and dots arranged in patterns on the face, hands, and other body parts. Tattoos carried multiple meanings. They marked important life transitions, such as a girl's coming of age or a boy's first successful hunt. They indicated social status and group membership. They were believed to provide spiritual protection and to ensure a good afterlife. The specific meanings varied among different Inuit groups, but the practice of tattooing was widespread. The tradition of tattooing declined after contact with missionaries, who discouraged the practice as pagan. For many decades, few Inuit received traditional tattoos, but in recent years there has been a revival of interest in this ancient art form. Young Inuit women in particular have sought out traditional tattoos as a way of connecting with their heritage and expressing their identity. Music was central to Inuit life. Songs accompanied every activity and occasion. There were songs for hunting, songs for celebration, songs for mourning, and songs for spiritual practice. Music filled the long winter nights, bringing people together in shared experience. The drum provided the heartbeat of Inuit music, its steady rhythm underlying the vocal melodies. The Inuit drum was a large, flat instrument, quite different from the drums of other cultures. It consisted of a wooden frame, often made from driftwood, with a membrane of caribou or seal skin stretched across one side. The drum was held by a handle and beaten on the edge of the frame, not on the membrane itself. This technique produced a deep, resonant sound that could be heard throughout a dwelling. Drumming was typically accompanied by singing. Inuit songs used a limited range of notes, but achieved great expressiveness through rhythm, dynamics, and vocal techniques. Singers might use throat sounds, breathing effects, and other special techniques to create variety and interest. The combination of drumming and singing created a hypnotic effect that could induce altered states of consciousness. Drum dances were important social and ceremonial events. People would gather in a large dwelling or community space to sing, drum, and dance. Performers would take turns, each presenting their own songs, while others watched and listened. The audience would respond with encouragement, joining in on familiar songs or commenting on the performance. The songs performed at drum dances served various purposes. Some were personal songs, composed by individuals to express their experiences, feelings, or achievements. A hunter might compose a song about a successful hunt, describing the pursuit and capture of the animal. A woman might compose a song about her children or her work. These personal songs were considered the property of their composers and could not be sung by others without permission. Other songs were communal, belonging to the group rather than individuals. These might be traditional songs passed down through generations, celebrating ancestors or recounting mythological events. Everyone knew these songs and could join in singing them. They reinforced group identity and connected the present to the past. Some songs were used for conflict resolution. When disputes arose between individuals, they might be settled through song duels rather than physical violence. Each party would compose mocking songs about the other, performing them before the community. The audience would judge the performances, and the better singer was considered the winner. This method allowed conflicts to be resolved publicly while providing entertainment for the community. Throat singing was a distinctive musical tradition practiced by Inuit women in some regions. Two women would stand facing each other, very close together, and produce rhythmic sounds using their throats, breath, and voices. The sounds would interlock, creating complex patterns that seemed almost impossible for just two voices to produce. Throat singing was often competitive, with each woman trying to outlast the other. The first to laugh, run out of breath, or lose the rhythm was the loser. The origins of throat singing are unclear, but it appears to have been practiced for many generations. It may have developed as a game to pass time during the long winter months when men were away hunting. The sounds may imitate natural phenomena like wind, water, and animal calls. Whatever its origins, throat singing is now recognized as a unique and valuable musical tradition. Oral traditions were the primary means of preserving and transmitting knowledge in Inuit culture. Without written language, everything that needed to be remembered had to be spoken and heard. Stories, histories, instructions, and wisdom were all passed down through the generations by word of mouth. Skilled storytellers were highly valued for their ability to preserve and present this cultural heritage. Inuit oral traditions encompassed many types of content. Myths explained the origins of the world, the creation of humans and animals, and the nature of supernatural beings. Legends recounted the deeds of heroes and ancestors. Historical accounts preserved memories of important events, migrations, and encounters. Practical knowledge about hunting, navigation, and survival was encoded in stories and instructions. Mythology provided a framework for understanding the world. Stories about Sedna explained the relationship between humans and sea mammals. Stories about the moon and sun explained celestial phenomena. Stories about the first humans explained where people came from and why they lived as they did. These myths were not merely entertainment, but were serious accounts of fundamental truths. One widespread myth told of a time when humans and animals could speak to each other and transform from one form to another. In this primordial time, the boundaries between species were fluid. A human might become a bear, a seal might become a human. This era ended when the world became fixed in its current form, but traces of the old fluidity remained. Shamans could still transform and communicate with animals. The spirits of animals still understood human speech. Legends celebrated heroes who accomplished great deeds. These heroes might be hunters who killed enormous animals, travelers who journeyed to distant lands, or shamans who visited the spirit world. Their stories provided models for behavior and demonstrated the heights that humans could achieve. Young people hearing these legends were inspired to emulate the heroes of the past. Historical traditions preserved memories of actual events. The arrival of Europeans, encounters with other peoples, famines, epidemics, and other significant occurrences were remembered and recounted. These accounts might be less dramatic than myths and legends, but they were equally important for maintaining a sense of identity and continuity. Practical knowledge was often embedded in stories. A tale about a hunter might include detailed information about animal behavior, hunting techniques, or environmental conditions. A story about a journey might describe landmarks, routes, and navigation methods. By listening to stories, young people absorbed practical information along with entertainment. Storytelling was a performance art. A skilled storyteller did not simply recite words but brought the story to life through voice, gesture, and expression. They might imitate the sounds of animals, act out dramatic moments, or pause for effect. The audience was not passive but participated through responses, questions, and encouragement. Stories were typically told during the long winter nights when families gathered together with little else to do. The warmth of the dwelling, the soft light of the oil lamp, and the presence of family and friends created an intimate atmosphere for storytelling. Children would listen wide-eyed as elders recounted tales they had heard from their own elders, continuing a chain of transmission stretching back countless generations. The arrival of written language and modern media has transformed Inuit oral traditions. Stories that were once transmitted only through speech can now be written down and preserved in books. Audio and video recordings capture performances that would otherwise be lost. These technologies have helped preserve traditional stories, but they have also changed the nature of storytelling. Today, efforts are underway to document and preserve Inuit oral traditions. Elders are being recorded telling traditional stories. Researchers are collecting and analysing oral accounts. Schools are teaching traditional stories alongside modern curriculum. These efforts recognise the value of oral traditions and seek to ensure their survival for future generations. The arts of the Inuit, whether carving, clothing, music or storytelling, reveal a culture of great depth and sophistication. These were not people focused solely on survival, but people who created beauty, expressed emotions, and explored the mysteries of existence. Their artistic traditions continue to evolve, connecting the present to the past while adapting to new circumstances and opportunities. The Inuit developed some of the most sophisticated technology of any pre-industrial people. Living in an environment that offered few natural resources, they created tools and equipment that allowed them to not only survive but thrive. Their innovations in transportation, hunting equipment, clothing and shelter represent remarkable achievements of human ingenuity. Understanding these technologies helps us appreciate the intelligence and creativity of Inuit culture. The kayak stands as one of the most elegant and efficient watercraft ever designed. This small enclosed boat was perfectly adapted to the needs of Arctic hunters. It was fast, manoeuvrable, and nearly impossible to capsize in skilled hands. It could be carried over ice and land when necessary. It was silent, allowing hunters to approach wary prey without warning. The kayak represents thousands of years of refinement, each generation making small improvements until the design approached perfection. The basic structure of a kayak consisted of a wooden frame covered with sealskin. The frame was made from driftwood or, in areas where driftwood was scarce, from bone and antler. The pieces were lashed together with sinew or baleen, creating a structure that was both strong and flexible. Flexibility was important because it allowed the kayak to absorb the shock of waves rather than breaking under stress. The sealskin covering was carefully prepared and sewn with waterproof seams. The skins were stretched tightly over the frame and lashed in place. When properly made, the covering was completely watertight, keeping the paddler dry even in rough seas. The covering needed regular maintenance, including treatment with oil to keep it supple and waterproof. The kayak was custom fitted to its owner. Each kayak was built to match the body dimensions of the person who would use it. The cockpit opening was sized so the paddler could seal it with their waterproof jacket, creating a watertight unit of boat and paddler. This tight fit allowed the paddler to roll the kayak upright if it capsized, a technique that required extensive practice to master. Different Inuit groups developed different kayak styles suited to their local conditions. Kayaks from Greenland were long and narrow, designed for speed and tracking in the relatively calm waters of fjords. Kayaks from Alaska were shorter and wider, better suited to the rougher waters of the Bering Sea. Kayaks from the central Canadian Arctic fell somewhere between these extremes. Each style represented an optimal solution to local conditions. The paddle used with a kayak was equally refined. Most Inuit kayak paddles had blades at both ends, allowing the paddler to stroke alternately on each side without switching grip. The paddle was sized to the paddler and the kayak, with the length and blade shape optimized for efficiency. Some paddles were made entirely of wood, while others had wooden shafts with bone or ivory blade tips. Kayaking skills were learned from childhood. Boys would begin practicing in calm water, gradually developing the balance, coordination, and technique needed for hunting. By adulthood, a skilled kayaker could handle almost any conditions, pursuing seals through ice-filled waters or riding out storms that would swamp less capable paddlers. The umiak was the other major Inuit watercraft. Unlike the kayak, which was designed for one person, the umiak was a large, open boat capable of carrying many people and heavy loads. Umiaks were used for whale hunting, for transporting families and belongings between camps, and for trading expeditions. The umiak was constructed similarly to the kayak, with a wooden or bone frame covered with skins. but the umiak was much larger, sometimes over 30 feet long. The frame was heavier and stronger to support the greater size. The covering was usually made from walrus or bearded seal skin, which was thicker and more durable than the ringed seal skin used for kayaks. Umiaks were propelled by paddles, with crew members sitting along the sides and paddling in unison. Some umiaks were also fitted with sails, allowing them to travel long distances with less effort. The addition of sails may have been a post-contact innovation adopted after seeing European sailing ships, or it may have been developed independently. The dog sled was the primary means of land transportation. Teams of dogs could pull heavy loads across ice and snow at speeds no human could match on foot. Dog sleds allowed the Inuit to travel great distances, transport meat from hunting sites to camps, and maintain contact with distant communities. The dog sled was as essential to Arctic life as the kayak and umiak. Inuit sled dogs were bred for strength, endurance, and the ability to survive extreme cold. They were not pets, but working animals, essential to the survival of their owners. A good dog team was a valuable possession, and caring for dogs was a significant responsibility. Dogs needed to be fed, which meant catching extra food during hunts. They needed to be trained to work together as a team. They needed shelter from the worst weather. The sled itself was a carefully designed piece of equipment. The runners were made from wood, bone, or even frozen fish wrapped in skins. In some regions, runners were coated with ice to reduce friction, a technique that required regular maintenance, but greatly increased speed and efficiency. The sled bed was lashed to the runners with flexible bindings that allowed the sled to flex over rough terrain without breaking. Dogs were harnessed to the sled in various configurations depending on the region. In some areas, dogs were hitched in a fan pattern, with each dog attached to the sled by its own line. This configuration worked well on sea ice, where there were few obstacles. In other areas, dogs were hitched in pairs along a central line, a configuration better suited to travel through rough terrain or narrow passages. Controlling a dog team required skill and experience. The driver used voice commands to direct the dogs, supplemented by a whip that was cracked in the air rather than used to strike the animals. A well-trained team would respond to commands instantly, turning, stopping, or speeding up as directed. Building this level of training and trust took years of work. Hunting equipment represented another area of technological sophistication. The toggling harpoon, described earlier, was a masterpiece of engineering. Its design ensured that once it struck an animal, it could not be shaken loose. The toggle head would penetrate the skin, then turn sideways, creating an anchor that held firm no matter how the animal struggled. The harpoon system included multiple components that worked together. The shaft provided the weight and balance needed for accurate throwing. The foreshaft connected the toggle head to the shaft and was designed to detach on impact, preventing the shaft from being damaged by a thrashing animal. The line connected the toggle head to floats or to the hunter, allowing the animal to be tracked and eventually retrieved. Different types of harpoons were designed for different prey. Seal harpoons were relatively light, designed to be thrown from kayaks or used at breathing holes. Walrus harpoons were heavier and stronger, capable of penetrating the thick hide of these large animals. Whale harpoons were the largest, requiring great strength to throw, and strong lines to hold the massive prey. Floats were an essential part of the harpoon system for hunting large sea mammals. Made from inflated seal bladders, floats were attached to the harpoon line. When a harpooned animal dove, the floats would drag behind it, creating resistance that tired the animal and prevented it from diving too deep. Multiple floats might be attached, as additional harpoons struck the prey. The bow and arrow were used primarily for hunting land animals, especially caribou. Inuit bows were relatively short, designed to be used from kayaks or in the confined spaces of the Arctic landscape. They were made from wood, often reinforced with sinew or bone to increase their power. Arrows were tipped with stone, bone, or later metal points. The bird bowler was a specialized hunting tool for catching flying birds. It consisted of several weights, usually carved from bone or ivory, attached to cords that joined at a central point. The hunter would throw the bowler at a flock of birds. The weights would spread out in flight, and when they struck a bird, the cords would wrap around it, bringing it down. Fish were caught using various tools and techniques. Hooks made from bone or ivory were used for line fishing. Lysters, three-pronged spears, were used for spearing fish in shallow water. Nets woven from sinew or baleen were used to catch fish in rivers and streams. Weirs, structures built across waterways to trap fish, were constructed from stones or stakes. Snow knives were essential tools for building igloos. These large knives, traditionally made from bone or ivory and later from metal, were used to cut blocks of snow for construction. The blade had to be strong enough to cut through compacted snow without breaking, and the handle had to provide a secure grip even with mittened hands. Ulas were distinctive knives used primarily by women for processing skins and preparing food. The ulu had a curved blade attached to a handle at the top, rather than at one end, like most knives. This design allowed the user to apply downward pressure while cutting, making it ideal for scraping skins or cutting meat and blubber. The ulu remains in use today and has become a symbol of Inuit culture. Oil lamps provided light and heat in Inuit dwellings. These lamps, called kulik, were carved from stone and filled with rendered seal or whale blubber. A wick made from moss or cotton grass was placed along one edge of the lamp. When lit, the wick would draw oil from the reservoir and burn with a steady flame. A single lamp could provide enough light to work by and enough heat to keep a dwelling comfortable. The kulik was tended by women, who were responsible for maintaining the flame and managing the household's fuel supply. Keeping the lamp burning properly required skill and attention. The wick had to be trimmed regularly, the oil level maintained, and the flame adjusted for different needs. A well-tended lamp burned cleanly and efficiently, while a poorly tended lamp would smoke and waste fuel. Needle cases were important tools for women, who depended on needles for sewing clothing and other items. Traditional needles were made from bone, ivory, or bird bone, carefully shaped and polished to a fine point. These delicate tools needed protection from damage, so they were stored in decorated cases that were often works of art in themselves. Thread was made from sinew, the tough connective tissue found in animal tendons. Caribou sinew was preferred for most sewing because it was strong, flexible, and could be split into very fine threads. The sinew was dried, then split and twisted into thread of the desired thickness. When wet, sinew thread would swell slightly, helping to create waterproof seams. Snow goggles protected eyes from snow blindness, a painful condition caused by the intense reflection of sunlight off snow. These goggles were carved from bone, ivory, or wood, with narrow slits that reduced the amount of light reaching the eyes while still allowing the wearer to see. The slits were often carved at a slight angle to match the natural line of sight. Ice creepers were devices attached to boots to provide traction on slippery ice. Made from bone or ivory with sharp points, they were strapped to the soles of boots when walking on smooth ice. Without ice creepers, walking on polished ice would be dangerous or impossible. The technological achievements of the Inuit were not the result of sudden invention, but of gradual refinement over thousands of years. Each generation made small improvements to the tools and techniques they inherited, testing innovations against the harsh realities of Arctic life. Successful innovations were adopted and passed on, while unsuccessful ones were abandoned. This process of continuous improvement created technologies of remarkable sophistication. The Inuit were also quick to adopt useful technologies from other cultures. When Europeans arrived with metal tools, the Inuit recognized their advantages and eagerly traded for them. Metal knife blades, needles, and harpoon points were incorporated into traditional designs, improving their effectiveness. This willingness to adopt new technologies while maintaining traditional knowledge demonstrates the pragmatic intelligence of Inuit culture. Today, many traditional Inuit technologies have been replaced by modern alternatives. Snowmobiles have largely replaced dog sleds. Aluminum boats with outboard motors have replaced kayaks and umiaks. Rifles have replaced harpoons for most hunting. But traditional technologies have not been entirely abandoned. Many Inuit still build and use kayaks, still maintain dog teams, and still practice traditional skills. These technologies connect the present to the past and provide backup when modern equipment fails. The study of Inuit technology has influenced modern design and engineering. Kayak designs have been adopted by recreational paddlers worldwide. Arctic clothing principles have been applied to modern cold-weather gear. The efficiency and elegance of Inuit solutions continue to inspire designers seeking to solve similar problems. For thousands of years, the Inuit lived in their Arctic homeland with little knowledge of the wider world. They knew of other peoples, trading with neighbouring groups and occasionally encountering strangers. But the vast civilizations of Europe, Asia, and other continents were unknown to them. This isolation ended when European explorers began venturing into Arctic waters, seeking new routes, new resources, and new knowledge. The encounter between the Inuit and Europeans would eventually transform both cultures, though the impact on the Inuit would be far greater. The first Europeans to encounter the Inuit were likely the Norse, the seafaring people of Scandinavia who explored and settled many parts of the North Atlantic during the medieval period. Around the year 1000, Norse settlers established colonies in Greenland, bringing them into contact with the indigenous people they called Skraelings. These Skraelings included both the Dorset people, who were then still living in parts of Greenland, and the Thule people, who were just beginning their expansion into the region. The Norse sagas, the written records of Norse history and legend, contain several references to encounters with Skraelings. These accounts describe both peaceful trading and violent conflict. The Norse traded metal goods, cloth, and other items for furs and ivory, but relations were often tense and fighting sometimes broke out. The Norse apparently viewed the Skraelings with a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and fear. The Norse colonies in Greenland lasted for several centuries, but eventually failed. By the 15th century, the settlements had been abandoned, and the Norse presence in Greenland had ended. The reasons for this failure are debated, but climate change, economic isolation, and possibly conflicts with the Inuit all played roles. When Europeans returned to Greenland centuries later, they found only Inuit inhabitants. The next major European contact came in the 16th century, when explorers began searching for a northwest passage, a sea route around or through North America that would provide access to the riches of Asia. English explorer Martin Frobisher led 3 expeditions to the eastern Canadian Arctic in the 1570s. His encounters with the Inuit were marked by misunderstanding and violence. Frobisher's first encounter with Inuit occurred in 1576 on Baffin Island. Initial contact seemed friendly, with trading taking place between the two groups. But then 5 of Frobisher's sailors disappeared after rowing ashore. Frobisher believed they had been captured by the Inuit, though their fate remains unknown. In retaliation, Frobisher captured an Inuit man, taking him back to England, along with samples of what he believed was gold ore. The captured Inuit man caused a sensation in England. He was the first Inuit most English people had ever seen, and crowds gathered to view this exotic stranger from the frozen north. Sadly, he died within a few weeks of arriving in England, probably from disease. His capture set a pattern that would be repeated many times over the following centuries, as Inuit individuals were taken to Europe and displayed as curiosities. Frobisher's supposed gold ore turned out to be worthless iron pyrite, but his expedition sparked continued interest in the Arctic. Other explorers followed, seeking the Northwest Passage or other opportunities. Henry Hudson explored the bay that bears his name in 1610 and 1611. His crew mutinied and set him adrift, and he was never seen again, possibly perishing at the hands of Inuit or simply dying of exposure. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, European contact with the Inuit remained sporadic. Explorers came and went, mapping coastlines and searching for passages. Trading posts were established in some areas, particularly around Hudson Bay, where the Hudson's Bay Company began operations in 1670. The Inuit who lived near these posts gained access to European goods, but also became exposed to European diseases. Whaling brought more sustained European contact to some Inuit communities. European and American whalers began hunting in Arctic waters in the 17th century, pursuing the bowhead whales that were abundant in these regions. Whaling ships would spend months in Arctic waters, and their crews often interacted with local Inuit populations. The relationship between whalers and Inuit was complex. Whalers needed Inuit knowledge and skills to survive in the Arctic. They hired Inuit guides, purchased Inuit clothing, and learned Inuit hunting techniques. In return, they provided metal tools, firearms, and other goods that the Inuit valued. Some whalers formed relationships with Inuit women, producing children of mixed heritage. But whaling also brought problems. The intensive hunting of bowhead whales depleted populations that the Inuit had relied upon for thousands of years. Whalers introduced alcohol, which had devastating effects on some communities. Diseases brought by whalers killed many Inuit who had no immunity to European illnesses. The whaling era brought both benefits and harms to Inuit communities. The 19th century saw increased exploration of the Arctic, much of it focused on finding and mapping the Northwest Passage. British naval expeditions probed the Arctic archipelago, mapping islands and channels. The most famous of these expeditions was that of Sir John Franklin, who set out in 1845 with 2 ships and 129 men to complete the passage. The expedition disappeared, and the search for Franklin and his crew became one of the great dramas of the age. The Franklin expedition's fate remained a mystery for years. Search parties found evidence that the ships had become trapped in ice, and that the crew had abandoned them and tried to walk to safety. All had perished. Inuit oral traditions preserved accounts of encounters with the starving sailors, and Inuit testimony helped searchers piece together what had happened. The remains of Franklin's ships were finally discovered in 2014 and 2016, confirming much of what Inuit had reported for generations. The Franklin disaster highlighted the importance of Inuit knowledge for Arctic survival. European explorers who ignored Inuit advice often suffered and died. Those who learned from the Inuit, adopting their clothing, food, and travel methods, were far more likely to survive. This lesson was not always heeded, but some explorers recognized the value of Inuit expertise. Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen was among those who learned from the Inuit. Before attempting the Northwest Passage, he spent time living with Inuit communities, learning their survival techniques. When he finally made the passage in 1903 to 1906, his small expedition succeeded, where larger, better-equipped expeditions had failed. Amundsen credited Inuit knowledge for much of his success. The late 19th and early 20th centuries brought missionaries to many Inuit communities. Christian missionaries, both Catholic and Protestant, established missions throughout the Arctic. They sought to convert the Inuit to Christianity, often viewing traditional Inuit beliefs as primitive superstitions that needed to be replaced. The missionaries brought not only new religious ideas but also schools, medical care, and other services that would profoundly affect Inuit life. The impact of missionaries was mixed. On one hand, they provided education, healthcare, and material assistance that improved some aspects of Inuit life. They created written forms of Inuit languages, allowing oral traditions to be recorded and preserved. They advocated for Inuit welfare and sometimes protected communities from exploitation by traders and others. On the other hand, missionaries often actively suppressed traditional Inuit culture. They discouraged or forbade traditional spiritual practices, including shamanism, drum dancing, and the observation of taboos. They condemned traditional clothing, hairstyles, and customs as uncivilized. They separated children from their families to educate them in mission schools, disrupting the transmission of traditional knowledge. The suppression of shamanism was particularly significant. Missionaries viewed shamans as servants of evil spirits and worked to eliminate their influence. Many shamans converted to Christianity, abandoning their traditional roles. Others continued to practice in secret. Within a few generations, the open practice of shamanism had largely disappeared from most Inuit communities, though elements of traditional belief persisted beneath the surface. Despite the disruptions caused by missionaries, many Inuit genuinely embraced Christianity. The new religion offered explanations for the changes sweeping through their world and provided comfort in times of hardship. Christian concepts were often blended with traditional beliefs, creating syncretic forms of spirituality that incorporated elements of both traditions. Today, most Inuit identify as Christian, though interest in traditional spirituality has revived in recent decades. Trading relationships expanded throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Trading posts operated by the Hudson's Bay Company and other enterprises spread across the Arctic. The Inuit became increasingly integrated into the global economy, trading furs and other products for manufactured goods. This trade brought many benefits, including metal tools, firearms, and other items that made life easier. But it also created dependencies and vulnerabilities. The fur trade encouraged the Inuit to spend more time trapping animals for their pelts and less time on traditional subsistence activities. When fur prices were high, this trade was profitable. But when prices fell, as they did periodically, communities that had become dependent on trade goods suffered. The shift from subsistence hunting to commercial trapping changed traditional patterns of life and created new economic pressures. Firearms transformed Inuit hunting. Rifles were far more effective than traditional weapons for hunting caribou and other land animals. They allowed hunters to kill at greater distances with more reliability, but firearms also required ammunition, which had to be purchased from traders. This created another dependency on the outside economy and made traditional hunting skills less essential. The introduction of new foods also changed Inuit life. Flour, sugar, tea, and other imported foods became staples in many communities. These foods were convenient and often tasty, but they were less nutritious than traditional foods. The shift toward imported foods contributed to health problems that would become increasingly serious over time. Alcohol was perhaps the most destructive import. Traditional Inuit society had no experience with alcohol, and many individuals proved highly susceptible to its effects. Traders sometimes used alcohol to facilitate exchanges, taking advantage of intoxicated Inuit. Alcohol abuse became a serious problem in some communities, contributing to violence, family breakdown, and other social problems that persist to this day. Disease remained a constant threat throughout the contact period. The Inuit had no immunity to many European diseases, and epidemics periodically swept through communities with devastating effect. Influenza, measles, tuberculosis, and other diseases killed thousands of Inuit over the centuries. Some communities were nearly wiped out, their survivors scattered and traumatized. The early 20th century brought new forms of outside intervention. Governments began to take more active interest in their Arctic territories and the indigenous peoples living there. This interest was driven partly by humanitarian concerns, partly by desires to assert sovereignty, and partly by economic interests in Arctic resources. Whatever the motivations, government involvement would profoundly reshape Inuit life. In Canada, the government began establishing a more permanent presence in the Arctic during the early 1900s. Royal Canadian Mounted Police posts were set up in remote communities. Government administrators were appointed to oversee Inuit affairs. Policies were developed that would affect every aspect of Inuit life, from where people could live to how children would be educated. Similar processes occurred in other countries with Inuit populations. In Greenland, Danish colonial administration expanded and intensified. In Alaska, American governance replaced Russian rule after the 1867 purchase, bringing new laws and institutions. In each case, the Inuit found themselves subject to outside authorities who often had little understanding of their culture or needs. The first contacts between Inuit and Europeans set patterns that would continue for centuries. Europeans generally viewed the Inuit as primitive people who needed to be civilized, converted, and incorporated into modern society. The Inuit viewed Europeans with a mixture of curiosity, wariness, and pragmatic interest in the goods they offered. These attitudes shaped interactions and policies that would transform Inuit society in ways both beneficial and harmful. Looking back at this period of first contact, we can see both the resilience of the Inuit and the tremendous pressures they faced. Despite epidemics, cultural suppression, and economic disruption, the Inuit survived as a people. They adapted to new circumstances while maintaining core elements of their identity. But the changes were profound, and the full impact would not become clear until the 20th century brought even more dramatic transformations. The 20th century brought the full force of colonization to Inuit communities. What had been sporadic contact with outsiders became sustained intervention by governments, churches, and commercial interests. The Inuit found themselves increasingly subject to outside control, their traditional ways of life disrupted and sometimes deliberately destroyed. This period of intense colonization left deep scars that Inuit communities are still healing today. The process of colonization varied somewhat among the different countries where Inuit lived, but common patterns emerged everywhere. Governments sought to assert control over Arctic territories and their inhabitants. They established administrative systems, imposed laws, and implemented policies designed to transform the Inuit into citizens of modern nation-states. These efforts often showed little understanding of or respect for Inuit culture and needs. In Canada, the federal government took an increasingly active role in Inuit affairs during the 20th century. The Indian Act, which governed relations with First Nations peoples, was extended to cover the Inuits in various ways. Government administrators made decisions about where Inuit could live, how they could hunt, and how their children would be educated. The Inuit had little voice in these decisions, which were made by distant bureaucrats with limited knowledge of Arctic conditions. One of the most significant government interventions was the relocation of Inuit communities. During the 1950s, the Canadian government forcibly relocated several groups of Inuit to new locations in the high Arctic. The stated reasons included reducing pressure on wildlife populations and asserting Canadian sovereignty over remote territories. But the relocations were poorly planned and executed, causing tremendous suffering. The most notorious relocations involved Inuit from northern Quebec and Baffin Island, who were moved to Resolute Bay and Greiser Fjord among the most northerly communities in the world. These people were taken from their homes and deposited in unfamiliar territory, far from their traditional hunting grounds and family networks. They were promised supplies and support that often failed to materialize. Many suffered, and some died in the harsh conditions of the high Arctic. The relocated Inuit found themselves in an environment quite different from what they had known. Hunting patterns were different, wildlife was different, and the extreme conditions of the high Arctic were more challenging than what they had experienced before. Families were separated, traditional knowledge was less applicable, and the promised government support was inadequate. The trauma of these relocations has been passed down through generations. Decades later, the Canadian government acknowledged the harm caused by these relocations. In 2010, the government formally apologised to the relocated Inuit and their descendants. Compensation was provided to survivors, but no amount of money could fully repair the damage done to individuals, families, and communities by these ill-conceived policies. The residential school system was another devastating colonial intervention. Beginning in the late 19th century and continuing into the late 20th century, Indigenous children across Canada, including Inuit children, were taken from their families and placed in residential schools. These schools were operated by churches with government funding and were designed to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian society. Children were taken from their homes, sometimes by force, and transported to schools far from their communities. At these schools, they were forbidden to speak their languages or practice their cultures. They were given European names, clothing, and haircuts. They were taught that their traditional ways were backward and shameful. The goal was to, in the words of one official, kill the Indian in the child. The conditions in residential schools were often terrible. Many schools were underfunded and poorly maintained. Children were inadequately fed and clothed. Disease spread easily in crowded dormitories. Physical punishment was common, and physical and sexual abuse occurred at many schools. Thousands of children died at residential schools, many buried in unmarked graves far from their families. The survivors of residential schools carried deep trauma. They had been separated from their families during crucial developmental years. They had been taught to be ashamed of their culture and identity. Many had experienced abuse that left lasting psychological scars. When they returned to their communities, they often found themselves caught between two worlds, no longer fully comfortable in either their traditional culture or the Euro-Canadian society they had been taught to emulate. The intergenerational effects of residential schools continue to affect Inuit communities today. Survivors often struggled as parents, having been deprived of parental role models during their own childhoods. Cycles of abuse, addiction, and family dysfunction were established that persist across generations. The loss of language and cultural knowledge created gaps that communities are still working to fill. In recent years, the full scope of the residential school tragedy has become more widely known. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada documented the experiences of survivors and called for action to address the ongoing effects of the schools. The discovery of unmarked graves at former school sites has shocked Canadians and the world, bringing renewed attention to this dark chapter of history. Government policies also disrupted traditional Inuit economies. Wildlife management regulations restricted hunting in ways that conflicted with traditional practices. The establishment of game preserves and parks sometimes excluded Inuit from their traditional territories. Commercial fishing and hunting by outsiders depleted resources that Inuit communities depended upon. The introduction of the wage economy created new pressures and opportunities. As government services, mining operations, and other enterprises expanded in the Arctic, jobs became available for some Inuit. But these jobs often required skills that traditional education did not provide. They required people to work on schedules that conflicted with seasonal hunting patterns, and they were often located in settlements, encouraging or requiring people to abandon their traditional camps and nomadic lifestyles. The settlement policy was one of the most transformative colonial interventions. Governments encouraged or compelled Inuit to abandon their traditional semi-nomadic lifestyle and settle in permanent communities. These settlements were easier for governments to administer and provided centralized locations for schools, health clinics, and other services. But they also disrupted traditional patterns of life that had sustained the Inuit for thousands of years. Traditional Inuit life involved movement across the land, following the animals and the seasons. Families would move between seasonal camps, spending time in different locations throughout the year. This mobility was essential for accessing the dispersed resources of the Arctic environment. It also prevented the depletion of any single area and allowed the land to recover. Settlements in permanent communities changed everything. People could no longer move freely to follow the animals. They became dependent on hunting and fishing in the areas immediately surrounding their settlements. These areas often became depleted, making subsistence more difficult. Traditional knowledge about distant territories began to fade as people no longer travelled to those places. Housing in the new settlements was often inadequate. Government-built houses were designed according to southern standards and were poorly suited to Arctic conditions. They were expensive to heat and difficult to maintain. Overcrowding was common, with multiple families sometimes sharing small houses. These conditions contributed to health problems and social stress. The shift to settlement life had profound social effects. Traditional social structures, which were based on extended family groups and seasonal gatherings, were disrupted. People found themselves living in close proximity to others with whom they might have had little previous contact. Traditional mechanisms for resolving conflicts were less effective in the new settlement context. Social problems including violence, alcohol abuse, and family breakdown increased. Healthcare improved in some ways with settlements. Clinics and nursing stations provided access to medical care that had not been available before. Vaccination programs reduced the impact of infectious diseases. Emergency medical evacuation became possible for serious cases, but new health problems emerged related to changes in diet, lifestyle, and social conditions. The shift away from traditional foods had significant health consequences. Traditional Inuit foods, particularly marine mammals, provided excellent nutrition suited to Arctic conditions. The meat was high in protein, and the fat provided essential calories and nutrients, including vitamin D, which is difficult to obtain during the dark Arctic winter. Traditional foods also contained omega-3 fatty acids and other beneficial compounds. As imported foods became more common, health problems increased. Processed foods high in sugar and refined carbohydrates contributed to rising rates of obesity, diabetes, and dental problems. These conditions had been rare or unknown among Inuit eating traditional diets. The health transition from traditional to modern foods has been one of the most significant changes in Inuit life. Mental health also suffered during the colonial period. The disruption of traditional culture, the trauma of residential schools, the loss of autonomy and self-determination, and the social problems of settlement life all contributed to psychological distress. Rates of depression, anxiety and suicide increased dramatically. Suicide rates among Inuit, particularly young men, became among the highest in the world. The colonial period was not entirely negative. Education, healthcare, and other services brought real benefits to many Inuit. Material conditions improved in some ways, with better housing, more reliable food supplies, and access to modern technology. Some Inuit found opportunities in the new economy, building successful careers and businesses, but these benefits came at tremendous cost and the overall impact of colonization was deeply harmful. In Greenland, the colonial experience followed a somewhat different path but with similar outcomes. Danish colonial administration intensified during the 20th century, with policies designed to modernize Greenlandic society. The Danish government invested in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. But these investments came with cultural costs, as Greenlandic traditions were often devalued or suppressed. The concentration of population in larger settlements was a key policy in Greenland as elsewhere. Small scattered communities were consolidated into larger towns, where services could be more efficiently provided. This policy disrupted traditional patterns of life and created social problems similar to those seen in Canada. However, Greenland's relationship with Denmark evolved more quickly towards self-governance, giving Greenlanders more control over their own affairs. In Alaska, the Inuit experienced colonization, first under Russian rule and then under American governance after 1867. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 represented a significant turning point, providing Alaska Natives with land rights and financial compensation. This legislation created native corporations that have become important economic and political actors, but it also imposed Western legal and corporate structures on traditional communities with mixed results. The colonial period fundamentally transformed Inuit society. Traditional ways of life that had sustained the Inuit for thousands of years were disrupted or destroyed. Languages were suppressed, spiritual practices were forbidden, and children were taken from their families. The Inuit were made dependent on outside institutions and economies over which they had little control. Yet the Inuit survived. Despite everything, they maintained their identity as a people. They adapted to new circumstances while preserving core elements of their culture. They began to organize politically, demanding recognition of their rights and control over their own affairs. The seeds of the modern Inuit rights movement were planted during the darkest years of colonization, and they would eventually bear fruit. Understanding the colonial period is essential for understanding the Inuit today. The trauma of this era continues to affect individuals, families, and communities. The loss of language, culture, and traditional knowledge created gaps that are still being addressed. The social problems that emerge during colonization persist and require ongoing attention. But understanding this history also reveals the remarkable resilience of the Inuit people and their determination to survive as a distinct culture. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have brought dramatic changes to Inuit life. Political movements have won recognition of Inuit rights and created new forms of self-governance. Economic development has brought new opportunities and challenges. Climate change is transforming the Arctic environment in ways that threaten traditional ways of life, while opening new possibilities. The modern Inuit world is complex, dynamic, and full of both promise and peril. The Inuit rights movement emerged from the struggles of the colonial period. As Inuit became more educated and more connected to the wider world, they began to organize politically. They demanded recognition of their rights to their traditional lands, their resources, and their culture. They sought a voice in decisions that affected their lives. This movement would eventually achieve remarkable success. In Canada, the Inuit political movement gained momentum during the 1970s. Organizations like Inuit Tapirisat of Canada, now known as Inuit Tapirit Kanatami, were formed to represent Inuit interests at the national level. These organizations advocated for land claims, cultural preservation, and political autonomy. They worked to ensure that Inuit voices were heard in government decisions affecting the Arctic. The land claims process was a major focus of Inuit political activity. Traditional Inuit territories had never been formally ceded through treaties, leaving their legal status uncertain. The Inuit sought recognition of their rights to these lands and the resources they contained. Negotiations were long and complex, but they eventually produced agreements that fundamentally changed the relationship between the Inuit and the Canadian state. The most significant land claim agreement in Canada was the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, signed in 1993. This agreement covered a vast territory in the central and eastern Canadian Arctic, an area larger than Western Europe. It provided the Inuit with ownership of significant lands, including subsurface mineral rights in some areas. It established wildlife management boards with Inuit participation, and it committed the government to creating a new territory with a public government in which Inuits would be the majority. Nunavut, meaning our land in Inuktitut, came into existence on April 1, 1999. It was the first major change to the map of Canada in 50 years and represented a remarkable achievement for the Inuit political movement. Although Nunavut has a public government open to all residents, rather than an ethnic government exclusively for Inuit, the Inuit majority ensures that Inuit interests and perspectives shape territorial policy. The creation of Nunavut was celebrated as a triumph of Indigenous rights. For the first time in Canadian history, Indigenous people had a territory where they formed the majority and could exercise meaningful self-determination. The new territory faced enormous challenges, including limited infrastructure, a small tax base, and the ongoing social problems inherited from the colonial period. But it represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Inuit and the Canadian state. Other land claims agreements have been reached in different regions. The Inuvialuit Final Agreement, signed in 1984, covered the Western Canadian Arctic. The James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, signed in 1975, included provisions for the Inuit of Northern Quebec. The Labrador Inuit Land Claims Agreement, signed in 2005, created the Nunatsiavut government in Labrador. Each of these agreements provided land, resources, and self-governance rights to Inuit communities. In Greenland, the movement towards self-governance proceeded even further. Home rule was established in 1979, giving Greenlanders control over many aspects of their own affairs while remaining part of the Danish realm. Self-government was achieved in 2009, expanding Greenlandic autonomy and recognizing the Greenlandic people as a distinct nation with the right to eventual independence if they choose it. Greenland today is largely self-governing, with its own parliament, government, and flag. Denmark retains responsibility for foreign affairs and defence, but most domestic matters are controlled by the Greenlandic government. The official language is Greenlandic, an Inuit language closely related to the dialects spoken in Canada. Greenland has its own distinct identity, shaped by its Inuit heritage and its unique history. In Alaska, the situation is different because Alaska natives, including Inuit, are citizens of a state within the United States rather than residents of a distinct territory. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 provided land and money, but created a corporate structure rather than a governmental one. Alaska Native corporations own land and manage resources, but they do not have governmental authority. Despite these differences, Alaska Natives have achieved significant political influence. Native organizations advocate for their interests at state and federal levels. Native corporations have become important economic actors, and Alaska Natives have been elected to state and federal offices, giving them a voice in government decision-making. The international Inuit community has also organized to address common concerns. The Inuit Circumpolar Council, founded in 1977, represents Inuit from Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Russia. This organization provides a forum for discussing issues that affect Inuits across national boundaries, including environmental protection, cultural preservation, and human rights. The ICC has consultative status at the United Nations and participates in international discussions on Arctic issues. Economic development in the modern Arctic presents both opportunities and challenges. The Arctic contains significant natural resources, including oil, gas, minerals, and fish. Development of these resources could bring jobs and income to Inuit communities. But development also poses risks to the environment and to traditional ways of life. Mining has become an important economic activity in some Inuit regions. Mines extract diamonds, gold, iron, zinc, and other minerals from Arctic deposits. These operations provide jobs for local workers and generate revenue for governments and communities. But mining also raises environmental concerns, including the risk of pollution, habitat destruction, and disruption of wildlife populations. Oil and gas development has been particularly controversial. The Arctic holds substantial petroleum reserves, and energy companies are eager to exploit them. Development could bring significant economic benefits to Inuit communities, but the risks of oil spills and other environmental damage are severe, and many Inuit are concerned about the impact on wildlife and traditional hunting. Fishing is an important industry in many Inuit communities, particularly in Greenland and Alaska. Commercial fishing provides income and employment, building on traditional skills and knowledge. But fishing industries must be carefully managed to prevent overharvesting and ensure long-term sustainability. Climate change is also affecting fish populations, creating uncertainty about the future of this industry. Tourism has grown as a source of income in some Inuit communities. Visitors come to experience the Arctic landscape, see wildlife, and learn about Inuit culture. Tourism can provide jobs and support local businesses, but it also raises concerns about cultural commodification and environmental impact. Managing tourism to maximize benefits while minimizing harms requires careful planning and community involvement. The traditional economy remains important to many Inuits. Hunting, fishing, and gathering continue to provide food, materials, and cultural connection. Many Inuit combine wage employment with traditional activities, working for part of the year and hunting or fishing during other seasons. This mixed economy allows people to maintain connections to the land while participating in the modern economy. The value of traditional foods goes beyond nutrition. Hunting and sharing food are central to Inuit identity and social relationships. The skills involved in hunting connect people to their ancestors and their land. The sharing of food reinforces community bonds and ensures that everyone has enough to eat. Traditional foods are not merely calories but are essential elements of Inuit culture. However, traditional activities face numerous challenges. Climate change is altering the Arctic environment in ways that affect wildlife populations and hunting conditions. Regulations sometimes restrict traditional hunting practices. The high cost of equipment, including boats, snowmobiles, and firearms, makes hunting expensive. Young people may lack the skills and knowledge needed for traditional activities. Maintaining the traditional economy requires ongoing effort and support. Education has been a major focus of modern Inuit society. The traumatic legacy of residential schools created a deep ambivalence about formal education. But most Inuit today recognize the importance of education for their children's futures. Efforts have been made to develop education systems that incorporate Inuit language and culture while preparing students for success in the modern world. Bilingual education programs teach children in Inuit languages as well as English, French, or Danish, depending on the region. Curriculum has been developed that includes Inuit history, culture, and traditional knowledge alongside standard academic subjects. Elders are invited into schools to share their knowledge with students. These efforts aim to create education systems that strengthen rather than undermine Inuit identity. Higher education opportunities have expanded for Inuit students. Universities and colleges offer programs relevant to Arctic issues and Inuit concerns. Scholarships and support programs help Inuit students access higher education. Growing numbers of Inuit are earning degrees and entering professional careers, contributing their skills and perspectives to their communities and beyond. Healthcare in Inuit communities has improved significantly but continues to face challenges. Modern medical facilities are available in larger communities, and medical evacuation can transport patients to southern hospitals for specialized care. Vaccination programs have reduced infectious disease, prenatal care and safe childbirth have lowered infant mortality, but health disparities persist. Rates of chronic diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, are higher among Inuit than in the general population. Mental health problems, including depression and suicide, remain serious concerns. Access to health care is limited in remote communities. The healthcare system often struggles to provide culturally appropriate care that respects Inuit values and preferences. Addressing health challenges requires attention to their underlying causes. Poverty, inadequate housing, food insecurity, and historical trauma all contribute to poor health outcomes. Improving Inuit health requires not just better healthcare services, but also broader social and economic improvements. Community-based approaches that involve Inuit in designing and delivering health programs have shown promise. Housing remains a critical issue in many Inuit communities. Overcrowding is common, with multiple families sometimes sharing small houses. Housing stock is often old and poorly maintained. The high cost of construction and heating in the Arctic makes housing expensive. Inadequate housing contributes to health problems, social stress, and other difficulties. Governments have invested in housing construction and renovation, but demand continues to exceed supply. Innovative approaches to housing design and construction are being explored, including designs that incorporate traditional knowledge and are better suited to Arctic conditions. But solving the housing crisis will require sustained investment and attention over many years. Technology has transformed modern Inuit life. The internet and mobile communications connect even remote communities to the wider world. Social media allows Inuit to share their perspectives and connect with each other across vast distances. Technology supports education, healthcare, and economic activities. Young Inuit are often enthusiastic adopters of new technologies. But technology also brings challenges. The cost of internet and phone service is high in remote Arctic communities. Technology can be a distraction from traditional activities and face-to-face relationships. Social media can spread harmful content and contribute to mental health problems. Balancing the benefits and risks of technology is an ongoing challenge. The modern Inuit world is one of contrasts and complexity. Traditional practices coexist with modern technology. Ancient languages are spoken alongside English, French, and Danish. Hunters use GPS and satellite phones to navigate territories their ancestors knew by memory. This blending of old and new creates a unique culture that is neither purely traditional nor fully modern. The challenges facing the Inuit today are significant. Climate change threatens the Arctic environment on which their culture depends. Social problems rooted in historical trauma continue to affect communities. Economic development must be balanced against environmental and cultural concerns. Young people must find their way in a world very different from that of their grandparents. But the Inuit have faced challenges before and have survived. Their history demonstrates remarkable resilience and adaptability. The political achievements of recent decades show that the Inuit can organise effectively to advance their interests. The revival of interest in traditional language and culture suggests that Inuit identity remains strong. The future is uncertain, but the Inuit have every reason to face it with confidence. The preservation and revitalization of Inuit culture has become a central concern for Inuit communities. After generations of colonial suppression, many elements of traditional culture were at risk of being lost. Languages were declining, traditional knowledge was fading, and young people were growing up disconnected from their heritage. Recognizing these dangers, Inuit communities have undertaken determined efforts to preserve and strengthen their cultural traditions. Language preservation is perhaps the most urgent priority. Language is the foundation of culture, the medium through which knowledge, values, and identity are transmitted. When a language dies, much of the culture it carries dies with it. Inuit languages, while still spoken by many people, face serious threats from the dominance of English, French, and Danish in education, media, and public life. The situation varies across different Inuit regions. In Greenland, the Greenlandic language is relatively healthy, spoken by most of the population, and used in government, education, and media. The establishment of home rule and self-government has strengthened the position of Greenlandic, making it the official language of the territory. In Canada, the picture is more mixed. Inuktitut remains strong in some communities, particularly in Nunavut, where it is an official language alongside English and French. Many children grow up speaking Inuktitut at home and learning it in school. But in other regions, language loss has been more severe. In Labrador and parts of the Western Arctic, fewer young people are learning to speak Inuit languages fluently. In Alaska, Inuit languages face serious challenges. Most Alaska Inuit languages have few remaining fluent speakers, many of them elderly. Without intervention, these languages could disappear within a generation. Efforts are underway to document the languages and teach them to younger people, but the situation is critical. Language revitalization efforts take many forms. Immersion programs teach children entirely in Inuit languages, creating environments where the language is used naturally for all activities. Master-apprentice programs pair fluent elders with younger learners for intensive one-on-one instruction. Language nests provide early childhood education in Inuit languages, giving children a foundation in their heritage language before they encounter English or other dominant languages. Technology is being harnessed for language preservation. Dictionaries, grammar guides, and learning materials are being developed in digital formats. Apps and websites provide language learning resources accessible from anywhere. Social media platforms allow speakers to use and share their languages. Recording projects capture the voices of elders, preserving their knowledge for future generations. But technology alone cannot save a language. Languages survive when people use them in daily life, when children grow up hearing and speaking them, when communities value them and create opportunities for their use. Language revitalization requires sustained commitment from individuals, families, and communities. It requires support from governments and institutions. It requires changing attitudes that have devalued indigenous languages in favor of colonial languages. Traditional knowledge is another crucial element of cultural preservation. This knowledge, accumulated over thousands of years, encompasses understanding of the Arctic environment, wildlife behavior, weather patterns, navigation, survival skills, and much more. It is practical knowledge, essential for living on the land, but it is also cultural knowledge that connects people to their ancestors and their identity. Traditional knowledge was traditionally transmitted through observation, practice, and oral instruction. Children learned by watching their parents and elders, by participating in activities, and by listening to stories and explanations. This system of knowledge transmission was disrupted by colonial policies, particularly residential schools. that removed children from their families and communities. Efforts are now underway to document and preserve traditional knowledge. Elders are being interviewed and recorded, their knowledge captured in audio, video, and written form. Research projects are systematically documenting traditional knowledge about specific topics, from wildlife to weather to navigation. This documentation ensures that knowledge will not be lost when elders pass away. But documentation is not enough. Traditional knowledge must also be transmitted to new generations who will use it and build upon it. Programs have been developed to bring elders and young people together on the land, allowing knowledge to be passed on through traditional methods of observation and practice. Schools are incorporating traditional knowledge into their curricula. Community programs support the transmission of specific skills like hunting, sewing, and carving. The relationship between traditional knowledge and Western science has evolved over time. In the past, Western scientists often dismissed traditional knowledge as mere superstition or folklore. Today, there is growing recognition that traditional knowledge represents a valuable body of understanding developed through centuries of careful observation. Scientists increasingly seek to collaborate with traditional knowledge holders, combining different ways of knowing to achieve better understanding. Climate change research has been an important area of collaboration. Inuit hunters and elders have observed changes in the Arctic environment that complement and sometimes precede scientific measurements. Their observations of changes in ice conditions, wildlife behaviour and weather patterns provide valuable data for understanding climate change. This collaboration has helped bridge the gap between traditional and scientific knowledge systems. Traditional arts and crafts are being preserved and revitalised. Carving, sewing, and other traditional arts continue to be practised and taught. Art cooperatives and marketing programs support artists economically while preserving traditional skills. Museums and galleries collect and display Inuit art, bringing it to wider audiences. Young artists learn traditional techniques while also experimenting with new forms and materials. The economic dimension of arts preservation is important. When traditional arts can provide income, people have incentive to develop and maintain their skills. Art sales support individual artists and their families while also supporting the broader community. The success of Inuit art in international markets has brought recognition and respect, as well as income. Traditional music and storytelling are also being preserved. Recording projects have captured the songs and stories of elders. Performers continue to practice traditional forms while also creating new works that draw on traditional elements. Throat singing, which had nearly disappeared in some regions, has experienced a remarkable revival and has gained international recognition. Cultural events and festivals provide opportunities for celebrating and transmitting traditional culture. Community gatherings bring people together for drum dancing, games, feasting, and storytelling. Regional and national events showcase Inuit culture to wider audiences. These events strengthen community bonds while also raising awareness of Inuit culture among non-Inuit. The revival of traditional practices extends to spiritual and ceremonial dimensions. Interest in traditional spirituality has grown, even among Inuit who also identify as Christian. Traditional ceremonies and rituals are being revived in some communities. The practice of traditional tattooing has experienced a remarkable resurgence, particularly among young women seeking to connect with their heritage. Education plays a crucial role in cultural preservation. Schools that once served as instruments of cultural destruction are now being transformed into vehicles for cultural transmission. Curricula are being developed that teach Inuit history, language, and culture alongside standard academic subjects. Elders are being brought into schools to share their knowledge. The goal is education that strengthens Inuit identity rather than undermining it. The challenge is to create education systems that prepare students for success in the modern world while also grounding them in their cultural heritage. This requires balancing different types of knowledge and skills. It requires teachers who understand both Inuit culture and modern academic requirements. It requires resources and support that are often lacking in remote Arctic communities. Higher education is also evolving to better serve Inuit students and communities. Programs in Arctic studies, Indigenous governance, and related fields prepare students for careers that serve their communities. Research increasingly involves Inuit communities as partners rather than merely as subjects. Indigenous perspectives are being incorporated into academic disciplines that have traditionally excluded them. Youth engagement is essential for cultural continuity. Young people are the future of Inuit culture, and their involvement in cultural activities is crucial. Programs have been developed to engage youth in traditional activities, from hunting and fishing to arts and crafts to language learning. Youth leadership programs develop the next generation of community leaders. Social media and technology are being used to make traditional culture relevant and accessible to young people. But engaging youth is challenging. Young Inuit face many competing demands and distractions. Modern entertainment, social media, and the attractions of Southern culture compete for their attention. Economic pressures may require them to focus on education and employment rather than traditional activities. Some young people feel disconnected from traditional culture, seeing it as belonging to an older generation rather than to themselves. The key to engaging youth is making traditional culture relevant to their lives. This means showing how traditional knowledge and skills can be valuable in the modern world. It means creating opportunities for young people to participate in cultural activities in ways that fit their lives and interests. It means using modern tools and platforms to share traditional culture. And it means involving young people in shaping how their culture evolves and adapts. Many young Inuit are enthusiastically embracing their heritage. They are learning their languages, practicing traditional skills, and proudly identifying as Inuit. They are using social media to share their culture with the world, posting videos of traditional activities, speaking their languages online, and connecting with other Indigenous youth. They are creating new forms of cultural expression that blend traditional and modern elements. Young Inuit artists are gaining recognition for work that draws on traditional themes while also engaging with contemporary issues. Musicians are blending traditional sounds with modern genres, creating music that appeals to young audiences while maintaining cultural connections. Writers and filmmakers are telling Inuit stories in new ways, reaching audiences that traditional storytelling might not reach. Climate change presents both a threat and an opportunity for Inuit culture. The threat is obvious. The Arctic environment on which Inuit culture depends is changing rapidly. Sea ice is diminishing, permafrost is thawing, and wildlife populations are shifting. These changes affect traditional hunting and travel, making some practices more difficult or dangerous. The physical foundation of Inuit culture is being transformed, but climate change also creates opportunities for Inuit voices to be heard. The Inuit are among the people most directly affected by climate change, and their experiences provide powerful testimony about its impacts. Inuit leaders have become important voices in international climate discussions, bringing the human dimension of climate change to global attention. This visibility has raised awareness of Inuit culture and concerns. Inuit traditional knowledge is increasingly recognized as valuable for understanding and responding to climate change. Inuit observations of environmental changes complement scientific measurements. Traditional knowledge about adaptation and resilience offers lessons for responding to current challenges. The integration of traditional knowledge into climate research and policy represents a significant shift in how indigenous knowledge is valued. The future of Inuit culture depends on many factors, some within Inuit control and some beyond it. Political and economic conditions will shape the resources available for cultural preservation. Climate change will continue to transform the Arctic environment. Global forces will continue to influence Inuit communities in ways both positive and negative. But the most important factor is the commitment of Inuit people themselves to maintaining and transmitting their culture. This commitment has been demonstrated repeatedly throughout Inuit history. Despite colonization, despite residential schools, despite all the pressures toward assimilation, the Inuit have maintained their identity as a distinct people. This resilience provides reason for optimism about the future. The Inuit are not passive recipients of change, but active agents shaping their own future. They are making choices about which elements of traditional culture to preserve and which to adapt. They are developing new institutions and practices that reflect their values and needs. They are engaging with the wider world on their own terms, sharing their culture while also learning from others. The story of the Inuit is not finished. It continues to unfold in the lives of Inuit people today and will continue into the future. The challenges are significant, but so are the strengths and resources that the Inuit bring to meeting them. The culture that sustained the Inuit through thousands of years of Arctic life continues to sustain them as they navigate the complexities of the modern world. Looking back over the entire story of the Inuit, certain themes stand out. Adaptation has been constant, from the first migrations across Beringia to the present day. The Inuit have repeatedly demonstrated the ability to adjust to new circumstances while maintaining core elements of their identity. This adaptability is perhaps their greatest strength. Connection to the land has been central to Inuit culture throughout its history. The intimate knowledge of the Arctic environment, the spiritual relationship with animals and natural forces, the practical skills for living on the land, all of these have defined what it means to be Inuit. Even as many Inuit now live in modern settlements and work in wage employment, connection to the land remains important. Community and sharing have sustained the Inuit through countless challenges. The harsh Arctic environment required cooperation for survival. Food was shared, knowledge was shared, and burdens were shared. This ethic of sharing and mutual support continues to characterize Inuit communities, providing resilience in the face of modern challenges. Resilience in the face of adversity has been demonstrated again and again. The Inuit have survived ice ages, climate changes, epidemics, colonization, and cultural suppression. Each challenge has tested them, and each time they have found ways to survive and continue. This history of resilience provides confidence that they will continue to meet whatever challenges the future brings. The Inuit story also offers lessons for all of humanity. It demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of human beings, our ability to thrive in even the most challenging environments. It shows the importance of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. It illustrates the value of living in harmony with the natural world rather than trying to dominate it. And it reminds us of the richness and diversity of human cultures, each with its own wisdom to offer. As we conclude this exploration of Inuit history and culture, we are left with a sense of admiration for what the Inuit have achieved and continue to achieve. From their origins in ancient Asia to their present-day communities across the Arctic, the Inuit have written one of the most remarkable chapters in human history. Their story is one of courage, ingenuity, and endurance. It is a story that deserves to be known and remembered. The Arctic landscape that the Inuit call home is one of stark beauty and profound challenge. The endless white expanses of ice and snow, the dancing lights of the aurora borealis, the powerful animals that roam the land and sea, all of these have shaped the Inuit and been shaped by them in return. This relationship between people and place is at the heart of Inuit identity. Today, that relationship is being tested as never before. Climate change is transforming the Arctic faster than almost any other place on Earth. The ice that has defined Inuit life for thousands of years is retreating. The animals that the Inuit have hunted are changing their patterns. The very landscape is shifting as permafrost thaws and coastlines erode. Yet the Inuit face this challenge, as they have faced others, throughout their history, with determination, creativity, and hope. They are adapting their practices to new conditions. They are advocating for action on climate change at the highest levels. They are working to ensure that their culture will survive and thrive no matter what changes come. The Inuit have always been people of the ice. Whether they will remain so depends on forces largely beyond their control. But whatever the future holds, the Inuit will remain a people with a proud history, a rich culture, and an unbroken connection to their ancestors, who first ventured into the frozen north thousands of years ago. Their story continues, written not in books but in the lives of Inuit people across the Arctic. It is written in the hunters who still venture onto the ice in search of seals. It is written in the elders who share their knowledge with young people. It is written in the artists who carve stone and ivory into forms of beauty. It is written in the children who are learning to speak their ancestral languages. It is written in all the Inuit who carry their culture forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The entire story of the Inuit is ultimately a story about what it means to be human. It is about our capacity to adapt, to create, to endure. It is about our need for connection, to each other and to the world around us. It is about the cultures we build and the meanings we make. In learning about the Inuit, we learn something about ourselves and about the remarkable diversity of ways that human beings have found to live on this planet.